Greetings, brave warriors and shield maidens. If you seek the strength and wisdom of the ancient Vikings, you've come to the right place. Don't waste time. Subscribe to the channel now and join our horde to strengthen this community of true Vikings. As you can see, our channel is new, so your subscription is crucial to our growth. If you're a true fan of the Vikings, show your support. Let the power of the Viking axe guide your hand to click the like button, and in the comments, tell us which city you're watching from so we know where in the world our stories are reaching, all because the icy winds of Jotunheim howled across the fjord, carrying with them the last bitter breaths of winter. Along the rugged shores of Norway, in the year 850 AD, the small village of Ravenholm stirred to life under the weak rays of the spring sun. The air was thick with the scent of salt, pine, and smoldering hearth fires. At the edge of the fjord, where the dark waters lapped hungrily at the shore, stood Bjorn Ironside. His muscular frame was silhouetted against the misty morning light, axe in hand, his long hair whipping about his face in the relentless wind. With a fierce cry, he brought the axe down upon a thick wooden post, cleaving it in two with a single powerful stroke. "Again," barked Ulf, the grizzled old warrior overseeing Bjorn's training. "You strike like a child swatting at flies. Put your back into it, boy." Bjorn's eyes flashed with determination and a hint of frustration. He hefted the axe once more, his muscles straining beneath his tunic. "I am no boy, Ulf," he growled through gritted teeth. "I've seen 18 winters and I'm ready for the raids." Ulf spat on the ground, a wry smile creasing his battle-scarred face. 18 winters, aye. And how many raids? How many times have you felt an enemy's blood spray across your face? The young warrior's silence was answer enough. Bjorn turned back to the post, channeling his frustration into each swing. The sound of steel biting wood echoed across the fjord, punctuated by Bjorn's grunts of exertion. As the morning wore on, a small crowd gathered to watch. Among them was Astrid Stormbringer, newly appointed Jarl of the Ravenholm clan. Her piercing blue eyes studied Bjorn's form with a mixture of approval and concern. "He has the strength," she mused aloud. "But does he have the wisdom to lead?" Beside her, an old woman wrapped in furs chuckled softly. "Wisdom comes with time, Astrid. Or with pain. The boy will learn, one way or another." Astrid turned to the old woman, her expression softening slightly. "And what of me, Ylva? Do I have the wisdom to lead our people?" Ylva's rheumy eyes twinkled with mischief. "You? You were born with an old soul, child. But even old souls have much to learn." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the village center. Shouts and the clanging of shields drew their attention away from Bjorn's training. "Trouble at the thing," Astrid muttered, her hand instinctively moving to the hilt of her sword. "Come, Ylva. It seems wisdom is needed sooner rather than later." As they made their way to the village center, the scene before them unfolded like a storm breaking over the fjord. Two men, faces red with anger, stood nose to nose in the middle of a ring of onlookers. Their hands were on their weapons, and the air crackled with the threat of violence. "That land has belonged to my family for generations, Thorstein," the shorter of the two men shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "You have no right to graze your goats there." Thorstein, a bear of a man with a beard that reached his belt, sneered down at his opponent. "Your family? Ha! Your grandfather stole that land from mine during the Great Plague. I'm merely reclaiming what's rightfully ours." Astrid stepped into the circle, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Enough." Her voice cut through the tension like a well-honed blade. "Eric, Thorstein, you bring shame to our clan with this petty squabbling." Eric, the shorter man, turned to Astrid with fire in his eyes. "Petty? This is my livelihood we're talking about. What would you know of it, girl? You've been Jarl for barely a moon's turn." A hush fell over the crowd. Challenging the Jarl's authority so openly was a dangerous move. Astrid's hand tightened on her sword hilt, but her voice remained steady. "I know that our people face greater threats than property disputes," she said, her gaze sweeping the assembled villagers. "The Franks grow bolder by the day. Saxon ships have been spotted near our waters, and here we stand, ready to spill each other's blood over a patch of grazing land? Thorstein had the good sense to look abashed, but Eric wasn't backing down. Pretty words, Jarl. He spat the title like a curse. But words won't feed my family when this oaf's goats have stripped my land bare. Astrid's eyes narrowed. In that moment, the crowd saw not the young woman they had known since childhood, but the leader they needed in these uncertain times. No, words alone won't feed your family, Eric. But this will. She reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out a silver arm ring. This should cover your losses for the season, and you, Thorstein, will keep your goats on your own land until we can have this boundary dispute settled properly at the next thing. Both men stared at the arm ring, then at Astrid, their anger giving way to grudging respect. You would give up your own wealth for the sake of peace? Thorstein asked, his voice gruff with surprise. Astrid placed the arm ring in Eric's calloused hand. A jarl who hoards wealth while her people suffer is no jarl at all. Now go. See to your families and let there be no more talk of bloodshed between kinsmen. As the crowd dispersed, Ylva appeared at Astrid's side once more. Well handled, child, the old woman murmured. But be wary. Generosity can be seen as weakness by some. Astrid nodded, watching Eric and Thorstein walk away, the crisis averted for now. I know, Ylva, but what good is power if not used in service of our people? Their conversation was interrupted by a disturbance at the edge of the village. A figure stumbled out of the mist-shrouded forest, his clothes torn, his eyes wild. It was Einar the seer, and from the look on his face he bore news that would shake their world to its core. Einar fell to his knees before Astrid, his body trembling. Jarl, he gasped, I have seen. Astrid knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders. What is it, Einar? What have you seen? The seer's eyes locked onto hers, and in them, she saw a reflection of something vast and terrifying. A feast, he whispered. A feast in the halls of Aegir, deep beneath the waves. Gods and monsters, Jarl. And us. We are called. We are called to a challenge that will shake the very roots of Yggdrasil. A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. Bjorn, drawn by the commotion, pushed his way to the front, his face flushed from exertion and excitement. A challenge from the gods themselves? He asked, unable to keep the eagerness from his voice. What glory that would bring! Astrid shot him a warning look. Glory, yes, and danger beyond imagining. She turned back to Einar. Tell us everything, seer. What exactly did you see in your vision? As Einar began to recount his vision, the villagers of Ravenholm drew closer, their earlier disputes forgotten in the face of this new, cosmic drama unfolding before them. The call of the sea, it seemed, was about to lead them on an adventure that would test not just their strength and courage, but the very fabric of their world. In that moment, as the spring sun climbed higher in the sky and the winds of change swept across the fjord, Astrid, Bjorn, and Einar stood at the precipice of a journey that would forge them into legends. The tides of fate were turning, carrying with them the destiny of gods and mortals alike. The great hall of Ravenholm buzzed with tension and excitement. Torches flickered along the rough-hewn walls, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the assembled clan members. At the center of the hall stood Einar the seer, his eyes still wild from his vision, his voice hoarse as he recounted what he had seen. I tell you, it was Aegir himself. Einar's voice cracked with the intensity of his words. The great god of the sea, his beard tangled with seaweed, his crown of coral gleaming in the depths of his underwater hall. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Astrid Stormbringer, seated in the high seat of the Jarl, leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. And you say he issued a challenge, Einar? To us mortals? Einar nodded vigorously, his long hair whipping about his face. Yes, Jarl, a culinary competition of all things. The gods have challenged us to a feast with stakes higher than any of us could imagine. A burst of laughter erupted from the back of the hall. Bjorn Ironside pushed his way through the crowd, his face flushed with mead and skepticism. A cooking contest. Is this what the gods concern themselves with while we fight and die in their names? Einar's eyes flashed dangerously. Mock not the ways of the gods, Bjorn Ironside. This is no mere contest. The Feast of Aegir is a battle of wits, skill, and magic that will determine the fate of both realms. Astrid raised a hand, silencing the growing murmurs. Explain, Einar. What exactly are these stakes you speak of? The seer took a deep breath, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. The losing side must serve the winners. For a century. A collective gasp echoed through the hall, followed by an explosion of voices. Some cried out in fear, others in excitement at the prospect of God serving mortals. Astrid's voice cut through the chaos like a war horn. Silence. The hall fell quiet, all eyes turning to their Jarl. Astrid stood, her presence commanding respect despite her youth. This is no small matter to be decided in the heat of the moment. We must consider carefully. Einar, how long do we have to prepare for this competition? Einar closed his eyes, as if reaching back into his vision. The next full moon, Jarl. When the tide is highest, and the veil between worlds is thinnest. Bjorn, never one to stay quiet for long, spoke up again. And how exactly are we supposed to reach this underwater hall? Are we to sprout gills and fins? A crooked smile spread across Einar's face. Aegir will provide the means, young warrior, but the journey itself will be perilous beyond imagining. Astrid nodded slowly, her mind racing with the implications. We need time to discuss this. Einar, Bjorn, meet me in my private chambers. The rest of you, return to your homes. Speak of this to no one outside our clan until we have decided our course of action. As the crowd dispersed, filled with excited whispers and fearful murmurs, Astrid led Einar and Bjorn to a smaller room adjacent to the great hall. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the fur-covered benches and the great map of the known world carved into the wooden table. Astrid paced the length of the room, her fingers tracing the coastlines on the map. Einar, are you certain of what you saw? Could this not be some trick, some fever dream brought on by bad meat, or too much mead? The seer's face darkened. I have walked the paths between worlds since I was a child, Jarl. I know the touch of the gods when I feel it. This was real as the ground beneath our feet. Bjorn, lounging on one of the benches, snorted. Real or not, it's madness. We're warriors, not cooks. What hope do we have of besting the gods in their own hall? Astrid stopped pacing, fixing Bjorn with a steely gaze. And what of the alternative, Bjorn? Do we ignore the summons of the gods? Do we cower in our halls while other clans seize this opportunity for glory? The young warrior sat up straighter, a fire kindling in his eyes. Of course not. I fear no challenge, be it from man or god. But this is not the glory I dreamed of, Astrid. Glory comes in many forms, Einar said softly, and often it is not what we expect. Astrid nodded, turning back to the map. Einar is right. This is an opportunity unlike any our clan has ever faced. If we succeed, we could elevate our people to heights unimagined. If we fail, we serve as thralls to the gods for 100 years, Bjorn finished grimly. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Finally, Astrid spoke, her voice filled with resolve. We must accept the challenge. To do otherwise would be to show weakness, to admit that we are unworthy of the gods' attention. Einar nodded approvingly, while Bjorn's expression was a mix of excitement and apprehension. But, Astrid continued, we cannot go into this blindly. Einar, I need you to delve deeper into your visions. Learn everything you can about Aegir's Hall, about the nature of this competition. Consult the runes, the spirits, whatever means you have. The seer bowed his head. It will be done, Jarl. Bjorn, Astrid turned to the young warrior. You've always boasted of your connections with the skalds and travelers. Put those connections to use. Gather every tale, every scrap of lore about feasts in the halls of the gods. We need to know what we're up against. Bjorn grinned, cracking his knuckles. Consider it done. I'll have the Skalds singing for their supper by nightfall. Good, Astrid said, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. As for me, I'll begin gathering our finest cooks and hunters. If we're to compete with the gods, we'll need ingredients and skills worthy of Valhalla itself. As they prepared to leave, Einar suddenly stiffened, his eyes rolling back in his head. Bjorn caught him before he could fall, lowering the seer gently to the ground. Einar! Astrid knelt beside him, concern etched on her face. What is it? What do you see? The seer's body convulsed once, twice, then went still. When he opened his eyes, they glowed with an otherworldly light. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from the depths of the ocean itself. Beware the gifts of Loki, for even in chains, the trickster's reach is long. The path to Aegir's hall is paved with trials of courage, wit, and sacrifice. Only those true of heart and strong of will may pass. With a shuddering gasp, Einar returned to himself, the glow fading from his eyes. He looked up at Astrid and Bjorn, his face pale but determined. We must prepare and quickly. The gods are watching, and our every move from this moment on will determine our fate. Astrid helped Einar to his feet, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. Then we have no time to waste. Bjorn, spread the word. I want every able-bodied member of our clan ready to contribute. Hunters, fishers, foragers, brewers. Everyone has a part to play in this. Bjorn nodded, his earlier skepticism replaced by fierce determination. They'll be ready. We'll show these gods what mortals are capable of. As they left the chamber, the weight of their task settling heavily upon their shoulders, Astrid paused at the threshold. She looked back at the map, at the vast expanse of sea that separated their small village from the realm of the gods. May the Norns smile upon us, she whispered, for we sail into uncharted waters where the fate of gods and men hangs in the balance. With that, she stepped out into the cool spring air, ready to lead her people on the most extraordinary journey of their lives. The call of Aegir's feast echoed in their hearts, a siren song of danger and destiny that would change their world forever. The longship Stormbreaker cut through the churning waves like a blade through flesh. Dark, ominous clouds roiled overhead, occasional flashes of lightning illuminating the faces of the crew. At the prow stood Bjorn Ironside, his hair whipping wildly in the wind, a fierce grin plastered across his face. By Thor's hammer, this is living, he shouted over the howling gale. Let the sea throw its worst at us. From her position at the steering oar, Astrid Stormbringer shot him a withering glance. Careful what you wish for, Bjorn. The gods have keen ears, and Aegir's mood is fickle. No sooner had the words left her mouth than a monstrous wave crashed over the side of the ship, drenching the crew and nearly sweeping 2 men overboard. Astrid's muscles strained as she fought to keep the Stormbreaker on course. Bail, you lazy sons of thralls, she bellowed, unless you fancy a visit to Rand's watery hall. The crew leapt into action, some bailing furiously while others struggled to secure loose cargo. Einar the seer clung to the mast, his face ashen, muttering incantations under his breath. Bjorn made his way to Astrid's side, his earlier bravado somewhat dampened. Perhaps I spoke too soon, he admitted sheepishly. How much farther to Aegir's hall? Astrid squinted through the sheets of rain. Einar said we'd know when we're close. Until then, Her words were cut short by a bone-chilling roar that seemed to come from the very depths of the ocean. The entire ship shuddered, and a hush fell over the crew. Odin's eye, whispered one of the older warriors. What in the 9 worlds was that? As if in answer, the sea before them began to churn and bubble. A massive tentacle, easily as thick as the ship's mast, burst from the waves, followed by another and another. Kraken. The cry went up from a dozen throats at once. Bjorn's eyes widened in a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I thought they were just tales to frighten children. Astrid's jaw set in grim determination. Tales have a way of coming to life on this journey, it seems. All hands prepare for battle. The crew scrambled for weapons as more tentacles emerged, surrounding the ship. A monstrous head breached the surface, eyes the size of shield bosses fixing on the tiny vessel that dared to enter its domain. Einar staggered to Astrid's side, his voice hoarse with fear. This is no ordinary beast, it bears the mark of Aegir himself. Meaning what exactly? Bjorn demanded, hefting his great axe. Meaning, Astrid replied, her eyes never leaving the creature, that this is our first trial. We pass this test or we never reach the feast. The Kraken's tentacles lashed out, smashing against the ship's hull and sending several crew members flying. Bjorn leapt into action, his axe a blur of motion as he hacked at the suckered limbs. How do we defeat something like this? He shouted over the chaos. Astrid's mind raced. Brute force alone wouldn't be enough against a beast of this size. They needed cunning, strategy. The eyes, she suddenly cried out. Aim for its eyes. Archers, to me. A group of skilled bowmen assembled at her command, knocking arrows despite the pitching of the ship. Astrid raised her arm, waiting for the perfect moment as the Kraken's massive head rose once more from the waves. Loose! A volley of arrows arced through the air, several finding their mark in the creature's gigantic eye. The Kraken let out a roar of pain and fury, its tentacles thrashing wildly. Again, Astrid commanded, and someone get me a spear. As the archers loosed another volley, Bjorn fought his way through the tangle of tentacles, his axe biting deep into the rubbery flesh. Whatever you're planning, Astrid, do it quick, he shouted. We can't keep this up forever. Astrid hefted the spear handed to her, its tip gleaming wickedly in the stormlight. She took a deep breath, centering herself amidst the chaos. Time seemed to slow as she took aim, the sounds of battle fading to a dull roar in her ears. With a prayer to the gods on her lips, she hurled the spear with all her might. It flew true, piercing the Kraken's remaining eye with a sickening squelch. The creature's scream of agony shook the very air around them. Its tentacles flailed wildly, smashing against the ship with bone-crushing force. For a moment it seemed as though the Stormbreaker would be torn apart. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the Kraken began to sink beneath the waves. Its tentacles slipped away one by one, leaving only churning water and stunned silence in their wake. Bjorn was the first to break the spell, letting out a whoop of victory. We did it. By the gods, we actually did it. The crew's cheers were cut short as the ship gave an ominous groan. Astrid's eyes widened in alarm. We're taking on water, everyone, to the pumps. As they fought to keep the Stormbreaker afloat, Einar approached Astrid, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. The trial is not yet over, Jarl, he said softly. Look. Astrid followed his gaze to the horizon, where the storm clouds were parting to reveal a shimmering, ethereal light beneath the waves. Aegir's Hall, she breathed. We're close. Bjorn joined them, water dripping from his beard. So near and yet so far, he grumbled. How are we supposed to reach it in a sinking ship? Astrid's mind raced, considering and discarding options. Then, a memory surfaced, an old tale her grandmother used to tell. The breath of the sea, she murmured. What? Bjorn looked at her in confusion. Einar. Astrid turned to the seer. In your visions, did you see how we were meant to reach the underwater hall? The old man's brow furrowed in concentration. I saw figures breathing water as if it were air, but how? The kelp, Astrid exclaimed. The glowing kelp that grows in the deepest fjords. Grandmother said it could grant the ability to breathe underwater, but I always thought it was just a story. Understanding dawned on Einar's face. Of course, the gift of Aegir, to allow us passage to his realm. Bjorn looked skeptical. And I suppose this magical kelp is just going to appear out of nowhere? As if in answer, the shimmering light beneath the waves intensified. Tendrils of glowing kelp began to rise from the depths, surrounding the battered Stormbreaker. Astrid's eyes shone with determination. This is it, our next trial. and our passage to Aegir's Hall. Are you with me? Bjorn hefted his axe, a grin spreading across his face. To Helheim and back, Jarl. Astrid turned to address the crew, her voice ringing out over the sound of the waves. Men of Ravenholm, we stand at the threshold of legend. Beyond these waters lies a feast of the gods, and with it, the chance to etch our names in the very fabric of the 9 worlds. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over each face. The journey ahead is uncertain. We may face challenges beyond our wildest imaginings. But I ask you now, are you warriors of the North? Are you prepared to risk everything for the chance at immortality? A resounding cheer went up from the crew. Astrid nodded, a fierce pride swelling in her chest. Then take up the kelp and follow me into the depths. For glory, for our people, and for the saga that will be told of this day for generations to come. With that, she grasped a strand of the glowing kelp, and without hesitation bit into it. The taste was bitter and briny, but she forced herself to chew and swallow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a tingling sensation spread through her body, and suddenly, breathing became different. One by one, the crew followed suit. Some gagged on the taste, others looked terrified, but all obeyed their Jarl's command. As the Stormbreaker began its final descent into the waves, Astrid took one last look at the world above. The storm had passed, and stars were beginning to twinkle in the twilight sky. "May the Norns guide our fate," she whispered, and then, with a deep breath of seawater that miraculously filled her lungs with life-giving oxygen, she plunged into the depths. The journey to Aegir's Hall had only just begun, and the greatest challenges still lay ahead. But as Astrid led her people into the unknown, she felt a sense of destiny unlike anything she had ever known. Whatever trials awaited them in the realm beneath the waves, they would face them together, as true Vikings. The descent into the depths was like nothing Astrid had ever experienced. The weight of the ocean pressed in from all sides, yet the magical kelp allowed her to breathe and move with surprising ease. Schools of fish darted past in flashes of silver, and strange luminescent creatures pulsed in the darkness. Bjorn swam up beside her, his eyes wide with wonder. "By Thor's hammer," he breathed, his voice oddly clear in the water. "I never imagined such a world existed beneath the waves." Astrid nodded, her gaze fixed on the shimmering light growing stronger below them. "Stay alert," she cautioned. "We don't know what other guardians Aegir might have set in our path." As if summoned by her words, a massive shape loomed out of the gloom. At first, Astrid thought it was another sea monster, but as they drew closer, she realized it was a structure, the largest and most magnificent she had ever seen. Aegir's Hall rose from the ocean floor like a mountain of coral and pearl. Its spires twisted upward, adorned with shimmering shells and pulsing sea anemones. Great arches of whalebone formed the entrance, carved with runes that glowed with an otherworldly light. Einar gasped, nearly choking on the water he was breathing. "It's just as I saw in my vision," he whispered. "The seat of Aegir's power, where the fate of gods and mortals will be decided." The Vikings gathered before the massive entrance, their weapons at the ready. Astrid raised a hand, signaling for caution. "Remember," she said, her voice carrying to all, "we are here as guests and competitors. Show respect, but do not cower. We are the children of Odin, and we will make him proud this day." With a deep breath that filled her lungs with seawater, a sensation she was still struggling to get used to, Astrid led her people through the towering archway. The interior of Aegir's Hall was a sight that would be seared into their memories for the rest of their lives. The ceiling arched impossibly high, supported by columns of living coral that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Schools of fish swam lazily through the water, creating living tapestries of color and movement. At the far end of the hall, seated on thrones of mother of pearl and driftwood, were the gods themselves. Aegir, lord of the sea, his beard tangled with seaweed and crown glittering with pearls, sat at the center. To his right was Thor, the Thunderer, his red beard floating like a cloud around his face. To his left was Freya, the goddess of love and beauty, her golden hair swirling about her like a halo. And there, lurking in the shadows behind the thrones, his eyes gleaming with mischief, was Loki the trickster. Astrid's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the divine assembly. She could feel the weight of their gazes upon her, judging her worth with every step. Aegir's voice boomed through the hall, shaking the very water around them. "Welcome, mortals, to my realm beneath the waves. You have passed the first trials and proven yourselves worthy to compete in our grand feast." Astrid bowed low, careful to keep her eyes on the sea god. "We are honored by your invitation, Lord Aegir. The clan of Ravenholm stands ready to match our skills against the gods themselves." A rumble of laughter echoed through the hall. Thor leaned forward, his massive arms crossed over his chest. "Bold words, little one. But do you truly think you can outdo the feasts of Valhalla?" Before Astrid could respond, Bjorn stepped forward, his face flushed with a mixture of awe and defiance. "We may be mortal, Thunderer, but we are not without skill. The bounty of Midgard flows through our veins, and we will show you flavors you've never dreamed of." A tense silence fell over the hall. Astrid held her breath, fearing Bjorn's brash words might have doomed them all. But then Thor threw back his head and roared with laughter. "I like this one," he bellowed, slapping his knee. "He has the fire of a true warrior in his belly." Freya's melodious voice cut through the laughter. "Let us not forget the stakes of this competition," she said, her eyes locked on Astrid. "The losing side must serve the winners for a century. Are you prepared for such a commitment, mortal?" Astrid straightened her spine, meeting the goddess's gaze. "We are, Lady Freyja, and we ask in turn, are the gods prepared to honor their word should we prove victorious?" A murmur ran through the assembled deities. Loki stepped out of the shadows, a sly grin playing across his lips. "Oh, this is going to be fun," he purred. "I do so love it when mortals get ambitious." Aegir raised a hand, silencing the hall. "The terms are set, and both sides have agreed. Now, let us explain the nature of this culinary battle." With a wave of his hand, the water in the center of the hall began to swirl, forming a massive whirlpool. As it spun, images began to appear within its depths, visions of far-off lands and mythical realms. "You will be tasked with creating 3 dishes," Aegir explained. "Each must capture the essence of one of the 9 worlds. You will have until the next full moon to gather your ingredients and prepare your feast." Einar stepped forward, his eyes wide with realization. "The 9 worlds? But how are we to gather ingredients from realms we cannot reach?" Loki's grin widened. "Oh, that's the fun part, old man. We'll be providing you with, let's call them shortcuts. Pathways between the worlds that mortals were never meant to tread." Astrid's mind raced with the implications. "And the gods? Will you be bound by the same rules?" Freya nodded, a competitive glint in her eye. "We will. This is to be a fair contest after all. Though I wonder if fair truly applies when mortals challenge gods." Bjorn bristled at the implied insult, but Astrid laid a calming hand on his arm. "We understand, Lady Freyja, and we look forward to showing you just what mortals are capable of." Aegir clapped his hands, sending a shockwave through the water. "Then let the competition begin. You have until moonrise to select your team and make your preparations. Choose wisely, for the fate of both realms hangs in the balance." As the gods disappeared in a swirl of bubbles and light, Astrid turned to her clan. The magnitude of what they had undertaken was starting to sink in, and she could see a mixture of fear and excitement on their faces. "Well," Bjorn said, breaking the silence, "I suppose we'd better figure out who among us knows how to cook for gods." Astrid nodded, her mind already formulating a plan. "Einar, I need you to consult the runes. Find out everything you can about the 9 worlds and what flavors might best represent them." The old seer nodded, already pulling out his pouch of runestones. "Bjorn," Astrid continued, "gather our strongest warriors. We'll need protection when we venture into these other realms." "And what of you, Jarl?" one of the younger clan members asked. Astrid's eyes gleamed with determination. "I'm going to have a talk with our ship's cook. If we're going to win this competition, we'll need every ounce of culinary skill we can muster." As the clan dispersed to their tasks, Astrid took a moment to float in the grand hall, marveling at the sheer impossibility of their situation. They were mortals in the realm of gods, about to embark on a quest that would take them to the very edges of creation. "May the Norns guide our hands," she whispered to herself, "for we'll need all the help we can get." With that, she swam towards the exit, ready to begin preparations for the most important feast in the history of their people. The competition had begun, and the fate of gods and mortals hung in the balance, all resting on the culinary skills of a small clan from Ravenholm. As Astrid left the hall, she failed to notice the shadowy figure watching her from behind a column of coral. Loki's eyes glittered with mischief and something darker. "Oh yes," he murmured to himself. "This is going to be a feast to remember. Let the games begin." The shimmering portal pulsed before them, a swirling vortex of colors that seemed to defy the laws of nature. Astrid stood at its edge, her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of their quest heavy on her shoulders. Behind her, Bjorn and Einar exchanged nervous glances. "Are you certain this will take us to Muspelheim?" Bjorn asked, his hand tightening on the haft of his axe. Einar nodded, though his face was pale. The runes were clear. "This portal will lead us to the realm of fire and giants, but Astrid—" He hesitated, his voice dropping low. "The dangers there are beyond anything we've faced. Are you sure this ingredient is worth the risk?" Astrid turned to face her companions, her eyes blazing with determination. "The flame spice of Surtur is said to carry the very essence of Muspelheim. If we're to capture the true flavor of the Nine Worlds, we need it." She managed a wry smile. "Besides, what's a little danger compared to the wrath of the gods if we fail?" Bjorn barked out a laugh. "Well, when you put it that way." He stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Astrid. "Lead on, Jarl. Into the fire we go." With a deep breath, Astrid plunged into the portal. The sensation was like being torn apart and put back together in an instant. When her vision cleared, she found herself standing on a plain of black glass, rivers of lava flowing in the distance. The air shimmered with heat, and every breath felt like inhaling fire. "By Odin's eye," Bjorn gasped, stumbling as he emerged from the portal. "It's like stepping into a forge." Einar was the last to arrive, his face contorted in discomfort. "We must move quickly," he warned. "Our protections will not last long in this realm." They set off across the treacherous landscape, their boots crunching on the obsidian ground. In the distance, massive shapes moved through the heat haze, fire giants going about their eternal labors. As they approached a towering volcano, a booming voice shook the very air around them. "Who dares trespass in the realm of Surtur?" A figure emerged from the lava flows, growing larger with each step. Surtur, the fire giant king, stood before them, his body wreathed in flames, a massive sword of fire clutched in his hand. Astrid stepped forward, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Great Surtur, we come seeking the flame spice that grows in your domain. We are on a quest to—" "Silence, mortal!" Surtur roared, his eyes blazing like twin suns. "Your petty quests mean nothing to me. You will burn for your insolence." He raised his sword, ready to strike them down, but before he could swing, Bjorn leapt forward, his axe glinting in the firelight. "Wait," he shouted. "We challenge you, mighty Surtur, not with weapons but with a contest of strength." Surtur paused, curiosity overtaking his rage. "A contest? Speak quickly, little one, before I lose my patience." Bjorn grinned, though sweat poured down his face from the intense heat. "A simple test. If I can withstand the heat of your flames longer than you can withstand the cold of our northern winds, you grant us passage to gather the flame spice." The fire giant's laughter shook the ground beneath their feet. "You amuse me, mortal. Very well, I accept your challenge. But when you fail, your souls will fuel my fires for eternity." Astrid shot Bjorn a worried glance. Are you mad? How can you possibly withstand his flames? Bjorn winked, reaching into his pack. Remember those frost giant hairs Einar insisted we bring? Time to put them to use. As Surtur prepared his fiery onslaught, Bjorn quickly wove the frost giant hairs into a crude vest, whispering ancient words of protection that Einar had taught him. The air around him shimmered with cold energy, a stark contrast to the hellish landscape. Prepare yourself, mortal, Surtur bellowed, and unleashed a torrent of flame. Bjorn gritted his teeth as the fire washed over him. The frost giant hairs glowed blue, creating a barrier of intense cold around his body. Steam hissed where fire met ice, and Bjorn felt as though he was being torn between two extremes. Astrid and Einar watched in horror and awe as Bjorn stood his ground, the flames licking harmlessly around him. After what felt like an eternity, Surtur's attack subsided. Impossible, the fire giant growled. No mortal could withstand that. Bjorn, his face red and his breath coming in ragged gasps, managed a cocky grin. Your turn, big fellow. Let's see how you handle a taste of our winter. From his pack, he produced a small rune-carved horn, another of Einar's magical preparations. As he blew into it, a howling gale erupted, carrying with it the bone-chilling cold of the deepest Nordic winter. Surtur roared in pain and surprise as the icy wind buffeted him, steam rising from his fiery form. He staggered back, his flames dimming, frost forming on his obsidian skin. Enough, he bellowed, raising a hand in surrender. I yield. Never did I think to feel such cold in this realm. As the wind died down, Surtur regarded the Vikings with newfound respect. You have earned the right to gather the flame spice, but be warned, its power is not to be trifled with. He led them to a field of strange glowing plants that seemed to flicker and dance like living flames. Take only what you need, Surtur cautioned. Too much will burn even immortal tongues. As Astrid carefully harvested the flame spice, placing it in a special container Einar had prepared, she couldn't help but ask, Great Surtur, you seem to know of our quest. Are the gods truly so interested in this competition? The fire giant's eyes narrowed. The games of gods and mortals rarely end well. Be wary, little one. Not all in the 9 worlds wish to see this contest concluded. With their prize secured and Surtur's cryptic warning ringing in their ears, the Vikings made their way back to the portal. As they stepped through, Astrid's mind was already racing, planning their next move. They emerged back in Aegir's underwater realm, the cool water a blessed relief after the infernal heat of Muspelheim. But there was no time to rest. We have the flame spice, Astrid announced to the waiting clan members, but we need ingredients from the other realms as well. Einar, what's our next target? The old seer consulted his runes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Alfheim, he declared. The realm of the light elves. We seek the starlight honey, said to capture the very essence of elven magic. Bjorn groaned, still smoking slightly from his ordeal. Please tell me we won't have to fight any elf kings with riddles or songs. Astrid clapped him on the shoulder, grinning despite the challenges ahead. No promises, my friend. But after facing down Surtur himself, how bad could a few elves be? As they prepared for their next journey, Astrid couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. In the shadows of the coral formations, a pair of mischievous eyes gleamed. Loki, ever the trickster, was taking a keen interest in their quest. Oh, this is going to be entertaining, he murmured to himself. Let's see how our little mortals fare in the realm of light and beauty. Perhaps it's time to add a little chaos to the mix. With a flick of his wrist, Loki sent a subtle spell spiraling towards the portal the Vikings were preparing to use. As Astrid led her team through, the god of mischief's laughter echoed softly through Aegir's hall. The quest for divine ingredients continued, each realm presenting new challenges and dangers. But with every success, the Vikings of Ravenholm grew more confident. They were no longer simply mortals stumbling through the realms of gods. They were becoming legends in their own right. As the portal closed behind them, Whispers began to spread through the 9 worlds. Mortals were walking where they should not tread, gathering ingredients of immense power. The cosmic balance was shifting, and the outcome of this culinary competition would have consequences far beyond anything Astrid and her clan could imagine. The stage was set for a feast that would shake the very foundations of Yggdrasil itself. The great underwater kitchen of Aegir's Hall buzzed with frantic energy. Steam rose from bubbling cauldrons, knives flashed as they sliced through exotic ingredients, and the air was thick with a cacophony of sizzles, chops, and shouts. Astrid stood at the center of the chaos, her brow furrowed in concentration as she surveyed the scene. They had gathered ingredients from across the 9 worlds, each more wondrous and dangerous than the last. Now came the true test, turning these divine components into a feast worthy of the gods themselves. "Bjorn," she called out, spotting the warrior struggling with a particularly unruly tentacle. "How goes the preparation of the Kraken ink sauce?" Bjorn grunted, narrowly avoiding a slap from the still wriggling appendage. "Oh, just wonderful," he growled. "Turns out, even dead Kraken parts don't give up without a fight. But I'll tame this beast yet." Across the kitchen, Einar carefully measured out a pinch of glittering powder. "Astrid," he called, his voice tinged with worry, "are you certain about the proportions for the flame spice? Too much could quite literally set our guests' mouths ablaze." Astrid moved to his side, examining the recipe they had painstakingly developed. "We have to risk it," she said firmly. "The gods expect to taste the true essence of each realm. We can't hold back now." As she turned to check on another dish, a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. Ulva, the clan's eldest member and most experienced cook, was engaged in a heated argument with a tall, elegant figure that seemed to shimmer like starlight. "I don't care if you're the master chef of Alfheim itself," Ulva was saying, brandishing a wooden spoon like a weapon. "In this kitchen, we do things our way." The elf, for that's clearly what the figure was, drew himself up haughtily. "Your way? Your primitive mortal techniques will ruin the delicate flavors of the starlight honey. I was sent here to ensure—" "You were sent here to assist," Astrid interrupted, stepping between them. "Not to take over. We appreciate the guidance of Alfheim, but this is our feast to prepare." The elf's eyes narrowed. "You play a dangerous game, mortal. The balance of the 9 worlds hangs on this competition, and you would risk it all on your rustic methods?" Before Astrid could respond, a loud explosion rocked the kitchen. All heads turned to see Bjorn standing over a smoking cauldron, his face and upper body covered in what appeared to be squid ink. Astrid?" he called sheepishly. "I think we may need to rethink the Kraken ink sauce." Astrid closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them, her gaze was steely with determination. "All right, listen up, everyone. We've faced down fire giants, outwitted light elves, and braved the depths of Niflheim for these ingredients. We are not going to be defeated by a few culinary setbacks." She began moving through the kitchen, her voice rising with each step. "Bjorn, clean yourself up and start again. This time, try heating the ink before adding the tentacle. Ulva, work with our Alfheim friend here. Combine your knowledge, don't fight over it. Einar, trust your instincts on the spicing. You've read the bones, you know what the gods crave." As the kitchen staff scrambled to follow her orders, Astrid felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She turned to see a shadowy figure lurking near one of the storage areas. Her eyes widened in recognition and alarm. "Loki," she breathed. The trickster god stepped forward, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. "Well, well," he purred. "Isn't this a delightful scene? Mortals scrambling to please the divine palates. I do so love a good show." Astrid's hand instinctively went to her knife. "We weren't expecting a visit from the gods until the feast itself. To what do we owe the honor?" Loki's eyes glittered dangerously. "Oh, I just thought I'd drop by, offer a bit of assistance. After all, it's not every day mortals attempt to cook for the gods. It would be a shame if something were to go awry." As he spoke, his hand casually brushed against a shelf of ingredients. A jar of shimmering powder teetered precariously. Astrid lunged forward, catching the jar just before it hit the ground. "Your concern is touching," she said through gritted teeth. "But I think we can manage without divine intervention." Loki's laugh was like ice down her spine. "Can you now? How fascinating. You know, there are whispers in Asgard about this little competition of yours. Some of the gods are quite invested in the outcome." "Meaning what exactly?" Astrid demanded. The trickster god leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Meaning, little mortal, that you're playing a game far bigger than you realize. The feast you're preparing, it's not just about impressing Aegir and his friends. It's about power, about the very balance between realms." He straightened up, his demeanor suddenly light again. "But don't let me distract you. Carry on with your charming little cooking party. I'm sure it will all work out just fine." With a wink and a shimmer of magic, Loki vanished, leaving Astrid staring at the spot where he had stood, her mind racing. "Astrid?" Bjorn's voice snapped her back to the present. "Everything all right? You look like you've seen a draugr." She shook her head, trying to clear it. "I'm fine, just a reminder of what's at stake." She turned to face the kitchen, raising her voice once more. "All right, people. We've got divine palates to please and a cosmic balance to maintain. Let's make every dish count." As the kitchen erupted into renewed activity, Astrid couldn't shake the feeling that they were caught in the middle of something far more complex than a simple cooking competition. But there was no turning back now. Hours passed in a blur of chopping, stirring, and careful spellcasting. Dishes that defied mortal description began to take shape. A soup that swirled with the colors of Yggdrasil's leaves, a roast that sizzled with the fires of Muspelheim, a dessert that captured the ethereal beauty of Alfheim's forests. As they put the finishing touches on their godly feast, exhaustion etched on every face, Einar approached Astrid with a troubled expression. "The runes are restless," he murmured so only she could hear. "They speak of great change coming, of boundaries blurring between realms. Astrid, I fear we may have set something in motion that we don't fully understand." Astrid nodded grimly. "I know, but we're committed now. Whatever comes, we'll face it together, as we always have." She turned to address the tired but proud kitchen staff. "My friends, my clan, my family. What we've accomplished here is nothing short of miraculous. We've taken the essence of the 9 worlds and distilled it into a feast fit for the gods themselves." Her voice swelled with pride and determination. "Whatever happens when we present these dishes, know this: we have already achieved the impossible. We have walked in realms no mortal was meant to tread. We have faced down beings of immense power, and we have emerged not just unscathed, but triumphant." Bjorn raised his ale horn high. "To Astrid, to Ravenholm, may our feast be remembered in the halls of Valhalla for eternity." A cheer went up from the assembled Vikings, their weariness forgotten in the face of their impending triumph. As the sounds of celebration filled the kitchen, Astrid allowed herself a small smile. Whatever cosmic game they had been drawn into, whatever the gods had planned, she knew that her people would face it with courage and determination. The stage was set. The feast was prepared. Now, all that remained was to serve it to the gods themselves and face whatever consequences their culinary creation might unleash upon the 9 worlds. The great hall of Aegir shimmered with an otherworldly light, its coral walls pulsing with bioluminescence that cast ever-changing shadows across the assembled gods and mortals. At the center of the hall, a massive table had been set, its surface a masterpiece of pearl and abalone that seemed to capture the very essence of the sea. Astrid stood at the head of her clan, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might burst from her chest. Beside her, Bjorn fidgeted nervously with the hem of his tunic, while Einar's eyes darted about the room, reading the invisible currents of magic that swirled through the air. At the far end of the table sat Aegir himself, his massive form dwarfing even the grandest of the other gods. To his right was Odin All-Father, his single eye gleaming with inscrutable wisdom. Thor lounged to Aegir's left, Mjolnir resting casually at his feet. The other gods filled the remaining seats, their divine presence making the very air crackle with power. Aegir's voice boomed through the hall, silencing all other sound. "The time has come, mortals of Midgard. Present your offerings that we may judge your worth against the culinary mastery of the gods themselves." Astrid stepped forward, her voice clear and strong despite her nerves. "Great Aegir, lords and ladies of Asgard, we thank you for this opportunity. We have traversed the 9 worlds to bring you flavors worthy of your divine palates. We present to you now the fruits of our labor." At her signal, the clan began to bring forth their dishes. First came a soup, its surface shimmering like the waters of the Well of Urd. Steam rose from it in shapes that seemed to tell the story of creation itself. "We offer you the primordial brew," Astrid announced. "Within it you'll taste the very essence of Yggdrasil, from its deepest roots to its highest branches." Odin was the first to taste it, dipping his spoon into the swirling liquid. As he sipped, his eye widened in surprise. "By my missing eye," he murmured, "I taste the wisdom of ages in this broth. How did you capture such essence, mortal?" Astrid smiled, a hint of pride creeping into her voice. "We consulted with Mimir himself, trading a lock of giant's hair for a single drop of water from his well. This, combined with herbs from each of the 9 worlds, created a flavor that spans all of creation." Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the divine assembly. Even Thor, usually more interested in mead than fine cuisine, nodded approvingly. Next came the main course, a roast that sizzled and sparked as it was placed before the gods. The meat, if it could be called that, seemed to shift and change as one looked at it, sometimes appearing as the finest beef, other times shimmering like the scales of some mythical beast. "Behold, the shapeshifter's feast," Bjorn declared, his earlier nervousness forgotten in the excitement of presentation. "We hunted this beast in the mists between worlds where it took on the form of every creature we've ever known. Its flesh holds the essence of all beasts, magical and mundane." Tyr, the one-handed god of war, leaned forward eagerly. "A hunt between worlds? Now that sounds like a tale worth hearing." As the gods sampled the ever-changing meat, expressions of wonder and delight crossed their faces. Even Freya, known for her discerning tastes, seemed impressed. "The mortals have outdone themselves," she mused, turning to Odin. "Perhaps we underestimated their potential." Odin's face remained impassive, but there was a glint of something, approval, concern, in his eye. As the feast progressed, each dish seemed to outdo the last. There was bread baked with grain grown in Vanaheim's eternal fields, seasoned with herbs from Alfheim that sang as they were chewed. A salad of Idun's own apples, sliced so thin they were transparent, dressed with a vinaigrette made from the dew of Yggdrasil's leaves. But it was the final dish, the dessert, that truly captured the gods' attention. Einar stepped forward to present it, his hands trembling slightly, as he unveiled a confection that seemed to defy the laws of nature. "We humbly offer the cosmic sweetmeat," he said, his voice barely above a whisper yet carrying to every corner of the hall. "Within it, you'll taste the fire of creation and the ice of oblivion, the light of the first dawn and the darkness between stars." The dessert was a sphere that hovered above its plate, slowly rotating to reveal different facets. One side burned with the fires of Muspelheim, while another glittered with the frost of Niflheim. Starlight twinkled from within its depths, and at its very center, a darkness deeper than the void seemed to pulse with unknowable energy. As the gods tasted it, a hush fell over the hall. Expressions of awe, wonder, and even a hint of fear passed over their divine faces. Thor was the first to break the silence, his booming laugh shaking the coral pillars. "By my hammer, these mortals have done it. They've captured the very essence of creation in a single bite." Odin, however, did not share in the merriment. His eye was fixed on Astrid, his expression unreadable. "You've wielded powers beyond mortal ken," he said softly. Do you understand the consequences of what you've done? Astrid met his gaze steadily, though her heart raced. We sought only to honor the gods with the finest feast we could create. If we have overstepped, we humbly ask for your forgiveness. A tense silence fell over the hall. The other gods looked to Odin, waiting for his judgment. But before the Allfather could speak, a new voice cut through the air, a voice dripping with mischief and barely contained glee. "Oh, don't be such a bore, Father," Loki drawled, stepping out of the shadows where he had been watching the proceedings. "These mortals have done exactly what we asked of them. They've created a feast worthy of the gods. The fact that they've also managed to shake the foundations of reality in the process, well, that's just a delightful bonus, isn't it?" Odin's eye narrowed. "Loki, what part have you played in this?" The trickster god spread his hands innocently. "Me? I've done nothing but observe. It's these fascinating mortals who have done all the work. And I must say, I'm impressed. They've shown more creativity, more daring than I've seen from the gods in eons." He turned to Astrid and her clan, his eyes glittering dangerously. "You've done well, little mortals. But I wonder, are you prepared for what comes next?" Astrid felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean, Loki? We've completed the challenge set before us. We've prepared a feast for the gods. What more is there?" Loki's grin widened. "Oh, my dear, the feast was just the beginning. You've tapped into powers that blur the lines between realms. You've tasted the essence of creation itself. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" As if in response to his words, the hall began to tremble. The water around them swirled and churned, and in the distance a low, ominous rumble could be heard. Aegir rose from his seat, his expression grave. "The balance has been disturbed. The boundaries between worlds grow thin." Odin stood as well, his voice cutting through the growing chaos. "It seems, Astrid of Ravenholm, that your clan has inadvertently set in motion events that could reshape the 9 worlds. The question now is, what will you do to set things right?" Astrid looked around at her clan, seeing the mix of fear and determination on their faces. They had come seeking glory and the favor of the gods. Instead, they found themselves at the center of a cosmic upheaval. With a deep breath, Astrid squared her shoulders and faced the assembled gods. "Whatever it takes," she declared. "We started this and we'll finish it. If the 9 worlds are in danger because of our actions, then we'll do whatever is necessary to restore the balance." Thor grinned, hefting Mjolnir. "Well said, mortal. It seems we're in for an adventure that will be sung about in the halls of Valhalla for ages to come." As the hall erupted into a flurry of activity, gods and mortals alike preparing for the challenges ahead, Astrid couldn't help but wonder what they had truly set in motion. The feast of the gods had been just the beginning. Now, the real test of their courage, wit, and strength was about to begin. The great hall of Aegir shuddered, coral pillars groaning under the strain of cosmic forces. The water around them churned violently, creating whirlpools that threatened to suck gods and mortals alike into their depths. Astrid and her clan huddled together, their earlier triumph now overshadowed by the chaos they had unwittingly unleashed. Odin's voice boomed over the tumult, his single eye blazing with power. "The boundaries between realms weaken. We must act swiftly to prevent total collapse." Thor hefted Mjolnir, electricity crackling around the mighty hammer. "Point me at the problem, Father. I'll smash it back into place." But Loki's laughter cut through the din, sharp and mocking. "Oh, brother dear, your hammer won't fix this. The mortals have woven a tapestry of flavors and magic so complex, even I'm impressed. Brute force will only hasten our doom." Astrid stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. "Allfather, we take full responsibility for this chaos. Tell us how we can make it right." Odin turned his penetrating gaze upon her, and Astrid felt as if her very soul was being weighed. After a moment that seemed to stretch for eternity, he spoke. "Your feast, mortal, has done more than please our palates. It has awakened ancient magics, stirred the very roots of Yggdrasil itself. The 9 worlds seek to merge, drawn together by the essences you so skillfully combined. Freya stepped forward, her golden hair swirling in the turbulent waters. The mortal realm Midgard sits at the center of this convergence. If the worlds fully merge, it will be destroyed, crushed between forces it was never meant to withstand. The gravity of the situation hit Astrid like a physical blow. Our homes, our families, everyone we left behind in Ravnholm. Bjorn's hand found her shoulder, squeezing reassuringly. We'll fix this, Astrid. We have to. Einar, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder, spoke up. But how? We're just mortals. How can we hope to undo something of this magnitude? It was Loki who answered, his eyes gleaming with mischievous delight. Why, the same way you started it, of course, with a feast. All eyes turned to the trickster god, confusion evident on both divine and mortal faces. Loki rolled his eyes dramatically. Oh, come now. Surely I'm not the only one who sees it? These clever mortals wove the realms together with their culinary creation. To unravel it, they must create its opposite, a feast of separation, of boundaries reinforced. Odin stroked his beard thoughtfully. For once, Loki might be right. A ritual of unmaking, using the power of food and sacrifice to restore the boundaries. Thor frowned, clearly unhappy with a solution that didn't involve his hammer. And where exactly would we hold this unfeast? The roots of Yggdrasil, Odin declared, where all realms meet and diverge. It is there we must go to undo what has been done. Astrid felt a mix of determination and dread settle in her stomach. We'll do it. Whatever it takes, we'll set this right. But Aegir, who had been silent until now, raised a hand. Not so fast, mortal. You forget. You won our contest. By the ancient laws, we gods are bound to serve you for a century. How do you intend to prepare this feast while we are in your thrall? A hush fell over the assembly. Astrid looked at her clan, saw the conflicting emotions on their faces, the chance to command the gods themselves. It was beyond their wildest dreams. But at what cost? Taking a deep breath, Astrid made her decision. Great Aegir, lords and ladies of Asgard, we hereby release you from your obligation. The fate of the 9 worlds is more important than any prize we might claim. Murmurs of surprise and respect rippled through the divine gathering. Even Loki looked impressed, though he quickly hid it behind a smirk. Odin nodded solemnly. Your wisdom does you credit, Astrid of Ravnholm. But know this, in giving up your prize you bind yourselves more tightly to this task. The journey to Yggdrasil's roots will be perilous beyond imagining. Are you prepared for such a challenge? Bjorn stepped forward, his axe held high. We've faced fire giants and navigated the mists between worlds. We'll face whatever comes, All-Father. Einar nodded, though his voice quavered slightly. The runes have shown me glimpses of what lies ahead. It terrifies me, but I will not abandon our people to this fate. One by one, the other members of the clan voiced their agreement. Astrid felt a swell of pride in her chest. We're ready, Odin. Tell us what we must do. The All-Father waved his hand, and a shimmering image appeared in the water before them. A map of sorts, showing the twisting, impossible geography of Yggdrasil's roots. You must gather ingredients from each of the 9 worlds, he explained. But not just any ingredients. You must find items that embody the very essence of separation, of boundaries maintained. Freya stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. From Asgard you must take a single golden apple from Idun's orchard, the fruit that keeps the gods immortal and separate from the realm of death. Thor grinned, a competitive glint in his eye. From Jotunheim, you'll need ice that never melts, carved from the very edge of the world where it meets the Ginnungagap. Loki's contribution came with a sly wink. In Svartalfheim, seek out the dwarven void steel, metal forged in absolute nothingness. It's said to be able to cut through reality itself. And so it went, each god naming an ingredient more impossible than the last. Astrid's mind reeled at the task before them, but she steeled herself. They had no choice but to succeed. As the list of ingredients grew, so did the rumbling around them. The Hall of Aegir began to warp and twist, sections of it seeming to overlap with other realms. Through one archway, Astrid caught a glimpse of Muspelheim's fiery plains. Through another, the icy wastes of Niflheim beckoned. "We're out of time," Odin declared. "Astrid, you and your clan must depart immediately. We gods will do what we can to slow the merging of the realms, but our power is limited in this chaos." Astrid nodded, turning to her people. "This is it. Everything we've faced until now has been preparing us for this moment. We journey to the heart of creation itself, to save not just our home, but all of existence." Bjorn raised his axe with a battle cry. "For Ravenholm, for Midgard, for the 9 worlds." The clan took up the cry, their voices echoing through the disintegrating hall. Even in the face of cosmic calamity, their spirits remained unbroken. As they prepared to depart, gathering what supplies they could, Loki sidled up to Astrid. "I must say, I'm rather looking forward to seeing how you mortals handle this. It's been ages since anything truly interesting happened in the 9 worlds." Astrid eyed him warily. "Will you help us, trickster, or hinder us?" Loki's grin was enigmatic. "Oh, a bit of both, I expect. It's so much more fun that way, don't you think?" Before Astrid could respond, a great crack split the air. The water around them began to drain away, sucked into a vortex that seemed to lead to everywhere and nowhere at once. "Go," Odin commanded. "Follow the path of the water. It will lead you to the first of the ingredients you seek. May the Norns guide your steps, mortals. The fate of all realms rests in your hands." With one last look at the assembled gods, Astrid led her clan into the swirling vortex. As the waters of Aegir's hall engulfed them, carrying them towards dangers unknown, she sent up a silent prayer to any power that might be listening. The unfeast to save the 9 worlds had begun, and with it, the greatest adventure in the history of Ravenholm. As they plunged into the space between realms, Astrid could only hope that their courage, wit, and the bonds of their clan would be enough to face the trials ahead. The vortex spat them out onto a landscape that defied comprehension. Astrid and her clan found themselves standing on what appeared to be a massive tree branch, wider than the longest Viking longship. Above and below, more branches twisted and intertwined, creating a dizzying network that stretched as far as the eye could see in all directions. "By Thor's beard," Bjorn gasped, his knuckles white as he gripped his axe. "Are we inside Yggdrasil itself?" Einar nodded, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. "The World Tree. We stand upon the very bones of creation." As the clan gathered their wits, a low rumble shook the branch beneath their feet. In the distance, they could see realms colliding, the fiery mountains of Muspelheim crashing into the icy plains of Niflheim, creating explosions of steam and chaos. Astrid's voice cut through the awe and terror gripping her people. "We have no time to waste. Odin gave us our task. We must gather the ingredients for the unfeast before the 9 worlds tear each other apart." She pulled out the list they had hastily scribbled before their departure. First on the list, a golden apple from Idun's orchard in Asgard. "Any ideas on how to get there from wherever here is?" As if in answer, a shimmering path appeared before them, leading off the main branch and twisting upwards through the canopy of Yggdrasil. At its end, they could just make out a golden glow that could only be Asgard. "Well, that's convenient," Bjorn muttered suspiciously. "Almost too convenient, if you ask me." Einar frowned, consulting his runes. "The path is real, but treacherous. We'll face trials along the way, tests of our worthiness to enter the realm of the gods." Astrid nodded grimly. "Then we face them together. For Ravenholm, for Midgard, for all the realms. Move out." The clan set off along the shimmering path, their footsteps leaving ripples of energy in their wake. As they climbed higher into the branches of Yggdrasil, the very air around them seemed to thicken with power. Suddenly, the path before them split into 3, each branch leading in a different direction. At the fork stood 3 identical women, their faces ageless and serene. "Behold, mortals," they spoke in unison, their voices echoing with the weight of eternity. "We are the Norns, Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, past, present, and future. Choose your path wisely, for only one leads to Asgard, the others to oblivion." Astrid stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Great Norns, how are we to choose? What guidance can you offer?" The Norns smiled enigmatically. "3 questions you may ask, one of each of us. But beware, the past may mislead, the present may blind, and the future may terrify. Choose your questions with care." The clan huddled together, debating in hushed whispers. Finally, Astrid turned back to the Norns. "To Urd, keeper of the past, we ask, what path did the last successful questers take?" Urd's eyes gleamed with ancient memories. "They chose the path of fire and ice, of balance between extremes." Bjorn stepped forward to ask the second question. "To Verdandi, seer of the present, we ask, what dangers lie on each path at this very moment?" Verdandi's gaze seemed to pierce through them. "The left path burns with the fires of creation. The right path freezes with the chill of oblivion. The middle path teems with life and death in equal measure." Finally, Einar, his voice trembling, addressed the last Norn. "To Skuld, prophet of the future, we ask, what consequences await us if we choose incorrectly?" Skuld's eyes clouded over, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with foreboding. "Choose wrong, and the 9 worlds collapse. The Ginnungagap returns and all of creation is unmade." A heavy silence fell over the group. The weight of their choice pressed down upon them like a physical force. Astrid closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to center herself. "The middle path," she declared, her voice ringing with certainty. "Life and death, creation and destruction. It's the balance we seek to restore. That must be the way to Asgard." The Norns nodded in unison, and 2 of the paths faded away, leaving only the central route. "Wise choice, Astrid of Ravenholm, but the trials have only begun. May your wisdom guide you through what lies ahead." With that, the Norns vanished, leaving the clan to face the path before them. As they set off, the branch beneath their feet began to writhe and twist, coming alive with vegetation one moment, then withering to ash the next. "Keep moving," Astrid shouted as vines tried to ensnare their feet, and poisonous flowers bloomed and died in rapid succession around them. "Don't let it touch you." They ran, leapt, and fought their way forward, the very essence of life and death swirling around them. Bjorn's axe flashed, cutting through grasping branches, while Einar chanted protective spells to ward off the worst of the chaos. Just when it seemed they could go no further, the path opened up onto a vast platform. Before them stood a shimmering golden gate, beyond which they could see the spires of Asgard. But guarding the gate was a figure that made even the bravest among them quail. Heimdall, the all-seeing guardian of the Bifrost, stood before them, his golden armor gleaming and his sword Hofund held at the ready. "Halt, mortals," his voice boomed, shaking the very branches of Yggdrasil. "You stand at the threshold of Asgard. By what right do you seek entry into the realm of the gods?" Astrid stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Great Heimdall, we come on a quest to save the 9 worlds. Odin himself has tasked us with gathering ingredients for an unfeast to restore the boundaries between realms." Heimdall's piercing gaze seemed to look through them, seeing every thought and intention. "I see the truth in your words, Astrid of Ravenholm, but good intentions are not enough to enter Asgard. You must prove your worth." With a wave of his hand, Heimdall conjured a massive set of scales. "Place upon these scales that which you value most. If your sacrifice is deemed worthy, you may pass." The clan looked at each other in confusion and dismay. What could they possibly offer that would be valuable enough to gain entry to Asgard? Bjorn stepped forward first, placing his prized axe on the scale. "This axe has been my companion through every battle. I offer it freely for the sake of our quest." The scale dipped slightly, but not enough. Einar added his rune stones, the source of his mystical knowledge. Still, the scale remained unbalanced. One by one, the clan members added their most precious possessions, family heirlooms, weapons, even locks of hair from loved ones left behind in Ravenholm. Yet the scale refused to tip in their favor. Astrid watched, her heart heavy, as her people gave up everything they had. Then, with a sudden clarity, she understood what needed to be done. She stepped up to the scale and, to everyone's shock, placed her hand upon her chest. "I offer my heart," she declared. "Not the physical organ, but all that I am. My hopes, my fears, my very essence as a leader. If allowing us passage will save the 9 worlds, then I give myself fully to that cause." For a moment nothing happened, then with a sound like 1,000 bells ringing at once, the scale tipped dramatically in their favor. Heimdall's stern expression softened into something approaching respect. "Well offered, Astrid of Ravenholm. Your sacrifice is accepted." He stepped aside, the golden gate swinging open behind him. "Enter Asgard, and may your quest bring balance to the realms." As the clan passed through the gates, Astrid felt a profound change come over her. She was still herself, and yet different. Lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted, but also more connected to her people and the task before them than ever before. They emerged into the golden splendor of Asgard. The shining towers and rainbow bridge of legend spread out before them. But there was no time to marvel at the beauty. In the distance, they could see Idun's orchard, its golden apples gleaming like beacons. "Come on," Astrid urged, her voice filled with new purpose. "We have an apple to collect and 8 more ingredients to go. The 9 worlds are counting on us." As they raced toward the orchard, none of them noticed the shadowy figure watching from behind a pillar. Loki grinned to himself, his eyes gleaming with mischief and something darker. "Oh, this is going to be fun," he murmured. "Run, little mortals. Your real trials are only just beginning." The quest to save the 9 worlds continued, with Astrid and her clan racing against time, chaos, and forces beyond their comprehension. But with each step, each sacrifice, they were becoming more than just mortals on a quest. They were becoming legends. The branches of Yggdrasil groaned and twisted, reality itself bending as Astrid and her battered clan emerged from the swirling vortex of the World Tree. They stumbled onto the familiar shores of Ravenholm, their bodies battered, their spirits tested, but their eyes alight with the fire of those who have gazed upon the impossible and lived to tell the tale. Bjorn was the first to speak, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "By the gods, we actually did it. We gathered all the ingredients." Astrid nodded, her hand clutching the satchel that contained their hard-won prizes. Idun's golden apple, the never-melting ice from Jotunheim, dwarven void steel from Svartalfheim, and other mystical components from each of the 9 worlds. The weight of their quest hung heavy in her hand, and heavier still on her heart. As the mists of their otherworldly journey cleared, the clan's eyes widened in shock. Ravenholm was not as they had left it. The village seemed older, weathered by time they had not experienced. Moss grew thick on rooftops, and trees that had been saplings now stood tall and strong. "How long were we gone?" Einar whispered, his face pale with realization. A voice called out from the village, cracked with age but achingly familiar. "Who goes there? Speak quickly or face the wrath of Ravenholm." An elderly warrior hobbled into view, his beard white as snow but his eyes still sharp. Astrid's heart clenched as recognition dawned. "Leif? Little Leif?" she called out, hardly believing her eyes. The boy who had barely seen 12 winters when they left now stood before them as an old man. Leif's eyes widened in disbelief. "It cannot be. Astrid? Bjorn? You haven't aged a day." His gaze swept over the clan. "We thought you dead, lost to the sea or the wrath of the gods. It's been 50 years. The weight of his words crashed over them like a physical blow. 50 years. A lifetime lost in the blink of an eye. Astrid stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion. "Leif, we have much to explain. But first tell me, how fares Ravenholm? Our families, Leif's face softened with sympathy. Much has changed, Astrid. Some have passed on to Valhalla, others have grown old. But Ravenholm endures. Come, the village must see this miracle for themselves. As they walked into the village, faces peered out from doorways and windows. Whispers turned to shouts of disbelief and joy as recognition spread. Children who had been babes in arms now stood as adults with families of their own, looking upon the returned heroes with awe. In the center of the village, before the great hall, a crowd gathered. An elderly woman, her back bent with age but her eyes still fierce, pushed her way to the front. "Astrid, my Astrid," she called, her voice quavering. Astrid's composure broke. "Mother!" She rushed forward, embracing the woman who had been young and strong when she left. "Oh, Mother, I'm so sorry. We never meant to be gone so long." As tears flowed and reunions unfolded, Bjorn's voice cut through the emotional tumult. "Astrid, the ingredients, we can't forget our purpose." Reality crashed back upon them. The joy of homecoming was tempered by the knowledge that their quest was not yet complete. The 9 worlds still hung in the balance. Astrid straightened, wiping her eyes. "You're right, Bjorn. Leif, we need to speak with the village elders immediately. The fate of all realms hangs in the balance." In the great hall, now weathered by 5 decades of storms and seasons, Astrid and her clan recounted their incredible journey. They spoke of the feast for the gods, the cosmic imbalance they had unwittingly created, and their perilous quest to gather the ingredients for the unfeast. The elders listened in stunned silence, their aged faces a stark reminder of the time that had passed in Midgard, while the clan traversed the realms. "So you see," Astrid concluded, "we must prepare this unfeast immediately. The boundaries between worlds grow thinner by the moment. If we fail, all of creation may unravel." One of the elders, a man who had been a young warrior when they left, spoke up. "But how can we possibly help? We're just simple folk, not gods or heroes." Bjorn stepped forward, his voice ringing with conviction. "You're Vikings of Ravenholm. The blood of heroes runs in your veins, same as ours. We need every hand, every skill to prepare this feast that will save the 9 worlds." As if to underscore the urgency of their mission, a tremor shook the hall. Through the open doors, they could see the sky flickering, patches of other realms bleeding through. The fiery skies of Muspelheim one moment, the frozen wastes of Niflheim the next. Panic began to spread through the gathered villagers, but Astrid's voice cut through the fear. "People of Ravenholm, I know we have been absent, that we have missed the joys and sorrows of your lives. But now, we call upon you to stand with us one last time. Will you help us save not just our village, but all of creation?" A moment of silence hung heavy in the air. Then, slowly at first, but building to a roar, voices raised in affirmation. The spirit of Ravenholm, it seemed, had not dimmed in their absence. As the village mobilized, transforming into a hive of activity, Einar approached Astrid with a troubled expression. "The runes speak of a final trial," he murmured. "The unfeast must be prepared at the heart of Yggdrasil itself, where all realms intersect." Astrid's brow furrowed. "But how can we bring the entire village to the World Tree? And who will protect Ravenholm in our absence?" As if in answer to her questions, a shimmering portal appeared in the center of the village, and through it stepped a familiar figure. Heimdall, the guardian of the Bifrost. "Mortals of Midgard," his voice boomed, "Odin All-Father has seen your plight. The gods themselves will guard your realm while you undertake this final task. But make haste. Even divine power cannot hold back the merging of worlds indefinitely." With Heimdall's arrival, the last pieces fell into place. The village worked through the night, preparing the ingredients according to the mystical recipe Einar had divined from the runes. As dawn broke, a strange dawn that seemed to contain the light of multiple suns from different realms, they stood ready. Astrid addressed her people one last time before they stepped through Heimdall's portal. "Whatever happens on the other side, know that I am proud to call each of you my kin." The skalds will sing of Ravenholm's courage for generations to come. As they pass through the shimmering gateway, leaving behind the world they knew for the heart of all creation, Astrid felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. They had faced gods and monsters, traversed impossible realms, and lost decades in the blink of an eye. Now they would face their greatest challenge yet. The unfeast to save the 9 worlds was about to begin, and with it, the final chapter of their epic saga. As the last villager stepped through the portal and it sealed behind them, Astrid sent up a silent prayer to any power that might be listening. Guide our hands, steady our hearts, and may the spirit of Ravenholm prove strong enough to mend the very fabric of reality. With that thought echoing in her mind, Astrid led her people into the unknown, ready to face whatever trials awaited them at the heart of Yggdrasil. The fate of all realms hung in the balance, and the final battle was about to begin. The rhythmic clack of the loom filled the small wooden hut perched on the edge of the Norwegian fjord. Astrid's nimble fingers danced across the warp and weft, her brow furrowed in concentration as she wove intricate patterns into the fabric. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the salt of the sea and the promise of an approaching storm. Astrid paused, stretching her aching back. At 17 summers, she was already considered one of the village's most skilled weavers. Her tapestries adorned the great hall and were sought after by jarls from neighboring settlements. But lately, something had changed. The patterns she wove seemed to take on a life of their own, shifting and evolving beneath her fingers. A sudden gust of wind rattled the wooden shutters, making Astrid jump. She peered out the small window, her heart racing as she saw the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The fjord, usually a serene mirror reflecting the towering cliffs, now churned with white-capped waves. Odin's beard, she muttered, her fingers instinctively reaching for her weaving shuttle. This storm could sink half the fishing fleet. Without fully understanding why, Astrid began to weave. Her hands moved of their own accord, creating patterns she had never seen before. Swirls of blue and gray intertwined with streaks of silver, forming an image of turbulent seas gradually calming. As she worked, a strange warmth spread through her body, and the hut seemed to fade away. In her mind's eye, Astrid saw the storm clouds dissipating, the waves settling. She could almost feel the relief of the fishermen as they steered their boat safely back to shore. When she finally looked up from her work, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the fjord. The storm had passed, leaving behind only a gentle breeze and a sky streaked with pink and orange. Astrid stared at her tapestry in disbelief. What in the name of the gods just happened? A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. "Astrid, are you in there, girl?" The gruff voice of her father, Thorstein, called out. "Yes, father, come in," she replied, hastily covering her strange new creation with a cloth. Thorstein ducked through the low doorway, his massive frame filling the small space. His beard, still damp from the sea spray, glistened in the fading light. "By Thor's hammer, that was a close one," he said, shaking his head. "The storm came out of nowhere, but then it just disappeared. I've never seen anything like it." Astrid's heart pounded in her chest. "That's strange indeed, father. I'm glad you're safe." Thorstein's eyes narrowed as he studied his daughter's face. "Are you all right, Astrid? You look pale." "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just tired from weaving all day." Her father nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Well, don't work too hard. There's excitement in the village tonight. Bjorn Ironside and his men are preparing for their first raid to England. Your brother's going with them." Astrid's eyes widened. "Eric is going on the raid, but he's barely 16. Thorstein puffed out his chest with pride. "Aye, and it's high time he proved himself a man. Jarl Halfdan himself has blessed the expedition." As if on cue, a horn sounded from the village center, its deep bellow echoing across the fjord. "That'll be the Jarl calling us to the Great Hall," Thorstein said. "Come, Astrid. You can finish your weaving tomorrow." Astrid nodded. following her father out of the hut. As they made their way down the steep path to the village, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The world seemed sharper, more vivid, as if she was seeing it through new eyes. The great hall buzzed with excitement as they entered. Torches flickered on the walls, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the gathered villagers. At the far end, seated on a carved wooden throne, sat Jarl Halfdan. His piercing blue eyes surveyed the crowd, a slight smile playing on his lips beneath his neatly trimmed beard. Astrid spotted her brother, Eirik, standing with a group of young warriors. His face was flushed with excitement, his hand resting on the hilt of a new sword at his hip. She made her way towards him, weaving through the crowd. "Eirik," she called out, grabbing his arm. "Is it true? You're going on the raid?" Her brother grinned, his eyes shining. "It is, sister. Bjorn Ironside himself chose me for his crew. Can you believe it?" Astrid forced a smile, trying to quell the worry gnawing at her gut. "That's wonderful, Eirik, but promise me you'll be careful." Eirik laughed, ruffling her hair as he had done when they were children. "Always the worrier, aren't you? Don't fret, little sister. I'll return with enough silver to buy you 100 new looms." Before Astrid could respond, a hush fell over the hall. Jarl Halfdan had risen to his feet, his powerful voice carrying to every corner of the room. "My people," he began, his arms spread wide. "Tonight we stand on the cusp of a new era. For too long we have been content with fishing and trading, but the gods call us to greater glory." A cheer went up from the crowd, the clash of swords against shields punctuating the Jarl's words. "Tomorrow, our bravest warriors will set sail for the rich lands of England. They go not just for glory and riches, but to carve out a new future for all of us. A future where the name of our people will be spoken with awe and fear across the known world." As the crowd roared its approval, Astrid felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced around, her eyes landing on a figure standing in the shadows near the back of the hall. It was her grandmother Helga, the village seer. The old woman's eyes met Astrid's, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Excusing herself from Eirik's side, Astrid made her way to her grandmother. Helga took her hand without a word, leading her out of the hall and into the cool night air. "You felt it, didn't you?" Helga asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The change in the weave of fate?" Astrid nodded, her voice trembling as she recounted what had happened in her weaving hut. Helga listened intently, her wrinkled face grave in the moonlight. "The gods have blessed you with a rare gift, child," she said finally. "Or perhaps cursed you. Only time will tell." "But what does it mean, grandmother? What am I supposed to do?" Helga squeezed Astrid's hand. "You have been given the power to influence the threads of fate itself. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Every action, every thread you weave will have consequences." Astrid's mind reeled, overwhelmed by the implications. Should I try to stop Eirik from going on the raid? Or weave him a tapestry for protection? "That, my dear, is a decision only you can make," Helga replied. "But know this. The path you choose now will shape not just your destiny, but the destiny of our people." As they stood there under the star-filled sky, the sounds of celebration drifting from the great hall, Astrid felt the weight of her newfound power settling on her shoulders. The future, it seemed, hung by a thread, and that thread was in her hands. The dawn broke cold and gray over the Norwegian fjord, the mist clinging to the water's surface like a shroud. On the beach, a fleet of longships stood ready, their dragon-headed prows seeming to come alive in the dim light. The air thrummed with nervous energy as warriors made their final preparations, checking weapons and securing supplies. Astrid stood at the edge of the crowd, a small bundle clutched tightly to her chest. Her eyes scanned the bustling scene, finally landing on her brother Eirik. He stood tall among the other young warriors, his new sword glinting at his hip. "Eirik!" she called out, pushing her way through the throng. "Wait!" Her brother turned, his face breaking into a grin as he saw her. "Astrid, come to see me off, have you?" As she reached him, Astrid thrust the bundle into his hands. "I made this for you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "For protection." Eric unwrapped the bundle, revealing a small tapestry. Woven into its fabric were intricate patterns of protection runes and scenes of victorious warriors. But more than that, Astrid had poured her newfound power into every thread, willing it to keep her brother safe. "It's beautiful, sister," Eric said, his voice softening. He tucked the tapestry carefully into his tunic, close to his heart. "I'll treasure it always." A horn sounded, its deep bellow cutting through the morning air. Bjorn Ironside, leader of the expedition, strode down the beach, his presence commanding instant attention. "Warriors of the North," he called out, his voice carrying over the crash of waves. "The time has come. Glory and riches await us across the sea. Are you ready to claim them?" A roar went up from the assembled men, weapons raised high in salute. Astrid felt a chill run down her spine, not entirely from the cold morning air. Eric turned back to her, his eyes shining with excitement. "I have to go, Astrid. Don't worry about me. I'll return with enough silver to make us all rich." Before she could respond, he pulled her into a fierce hug, then turned and jogged towards the ships. Astrid watched, her heart heavy, as her brother and the other warriors began to board the longships. A hand fell on her shoulder, and she turned to see Jarl Halfdan standing beside her. His eyes were fixed on the departing fleet, a look of grim determination on his face. "They go to forge our future," he said, his deep voice rumbling in his chest. "But we who remain behind have work to do as well. Come, Astrid, there's much to discuss." Confused but unable to refuse the Jarl's summons, Astrid followed him back towards the village. As they walked, she noticed the older man studying her intently. "Your grandmother tells me you have a gift," Halfdan said abruptly, "a way with threads that goes beyond mere weaving." Astrid's steps faltered. I'm not sure what you mean, Jarl Halfdan." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Do not play coy with me, girl. These are dangerous times, and I need every advantage I can get. If you truly have the ability to influence fate through your weaving, I would have you use it for the good of our people." They had reached the great hall, and Halfdan ushered her inside. To Astrid's surprise, her grandmother Helga was already there, along with several of the village elders. "Astrid," Helga said, her voice gentle but her eyes sharp, "it's time you understood the full weight of your gift." Over the next hour, Astrid listened in growing astonishment as Helga and the elders spoke of ancient prophecies and the coming of great changes. They spoke of rival clans growing restless, of whispers of a new religion spreading from the south, and of omens that hinted at the approach of Ragnarok itself. "But what does this have to do with me?" Astrid finally burst out, overwhelmed by the gravity of what she was hearing. Jarl Halfdan leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Your gift, Astrid, could be the key to our survival. With your ability to influence fate, you could help us navigate the treacherous waters ahead." Astrid's mind reeled. "But I barely understand this power. How can I possibly—" Her words were cut off by a commotion outside. The door of the great hall burst open and a village scout rushed in, his face pale with fear. "Jarl Halfdan," he gasped. "Riders approaching from the east. It's Jarl Eric Bloodaxe and his men. They bear arms." The hall erupted into chaos. Halfdan bellowed orders, sending men to prepare defenses and gather the villagers. Amidst the confusion, Astrid felt a tugging on her arm. It was Helga, pulling her towards a side exit. "Quickly, child," the old woman urged. "We must get you to your loom. You may be our only hope of averting disaster." As they hurried through the village, Astrid's mind raced. "Grandmother, I don't know if I can do this. What if I make things worse?" Helga's grip on her arm tightened. "Trust in yourself, Astrid. The gods have given you this gift for a reason. Now is the time to use it." They reached Astrid's weaving hut, and Helga all but shoved her inside. "Weave, child. Weave as you've never woven before. Our fate rests in your hands." With trembling fingers, Astrid took her place at the loom. Outside, she could hear the approaching thunder of hoofbeats, the shouts of men preparing for battle. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to weave. As before, the world seemed to fall away. In her mind's eye, Astrid saw the threads of fate stretching out before her, a complex tapestry of possibilities. She saw Jarl Erik Bloodaxe, his face twisted with greed and anger. She saw Halfdan standing proud, rallying their people. And in the distance, she glimpsed Erik and the raiding party, unaware of the danger unfolding at home. Astrid's hands moved with supernatural speed, weaving patterns of protection, of peace, of understanding. She poured every ounce of her will into the fabric, begging the gods to guide her fingers. Time lost all meaning. Astrid wove on, even as her fingers bled and sweat poured down her face. She wove until the last thread was in place, and then, with a gasp, she collapsed to the floor. When she came to, Helga was bending over her, her wrinkled face creased with concern. "Astrid, can you hear me, child?" Astrid struggled to sit up, her entire body aching. What happened? The village is safe," Helga said, a note of wonder in her voice. "Jarl Erik Bloodaxe arrived at our gates, but instead of attacking, he asked for parley. He and Halfdan are negotiating a peace treaty as we speak." Astrid's eyes widened in disbelief. It worked? But how? Helga helped her to her feet, leading her to the window. Outside, instead of the chaos of battle, they saw Jarl Halfdan and Jarl Erik, clasping arms in the traditional gesture of peace. "Your weaving changed the course of fate, child," Helga said softly. "But remember, every action has consequences. The future you've woven may not be the one you expected." As Astrid watched the scene unfold, a mix of relief and apprehension washed over her. She had averted one crisis, but she could sense that this was only the beginning. The threads of fate were shifting, and she was now irrevocably entangled in their weave. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, as if echoing the tumultuous future that lay ahead. Astrid squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever destiny had in store. The young weaver had taken her first steps on a path that would change not only her life, but the fate of her entire people. The longship crested another wave, sending a spray of icy water across the deck. Bjorn Ironside stood at the prow, his keen eyes fixed on the horizon where the faint outline of the Northumbrian coast was just becoming visible. Behind him, 24 warriors readied their weapons and adjusted their armor, the excitement of impending battle palpable in the air. Eirik, Astrid's brother, gripped the side of the ship, his knuckles white. Despite his earlier bravado, the young warrior felt a knot of fear in his stomach. He reached into his tunic, fingers brushing against the protective tapestry his sister had given him. Its touch seemed to lend him strength. "Land ho!" came the cry from the lookout. Bjorn turned to address his men, his voice carrying over the wind and waves. "Warriors of the North, the riches of England lie before us. Remember, we are the wolves and they are the sheep. Show no mercy, take what is ours by right of conquest." A roar went up from the crew, but it was cut short as an arrow whistled past Bjorn's ear, embedding itself in the mast with a solid thunk. "Saxons!" Bjorn bellowed. "They've spotted us! Shields up!" The Vikings raised their round shields, just as a volley of arrows rained down upon them. Erik felt his heart racing as he huddled behind his shield, the thud of arrows striking wood echoing in his ears. As their ship ground against the pebbly shore, Bjorn leapt into the knee-deep water, his massive war axe already swinging. "For Odin!" he cried, charging towards the line of Saxon defenders that had formed on the beach. Eirik followed, his feet slipping on the wet stones as he struggled to keep up with the more experienced warriors. The clash of steel on steel filled the air as the two forces met in a frenzy of violence. A burly Saxon rushed at Eirik, sword raised high. Time seemed to slow as Eirik remembered his training, bringing up his own blade to parry the blow. The impact jarred his arm, but he held firm, twisting his sword to slide past the Saxon's guard and deliver a fatal thrust. As the man fell, Eric stood frozen for a moment, the reality of taking a life hitting him like a physical blow. But there was no time for reflection. Another Saxon was already charging towards him. The battle raged on, the Vikings slowly pushing the Saxons back from the beach. Eric found himself fighting alongside Bjorn, the legendary warrior cutting a swath through the enemy ranks. "You fight well, young one," Bjorn grunted between swings of his axe. "But don't get cocky. One mistake is all it takes." As if to emphasize his point, a Saxon spear suddenly protruded from Bjorn's shoulder. The Viking leader roared in pain and anger, snapping the shaft and beheading the spear thrower in one fluid motion. "Bjorn," Eirik cried out, moving to support the wounded leader. "It's nothing," Bjorn growled, though his face was pale beneath his beard. "Press the attack. We have them on the run." Indeed, the Saxon line was beginning to crumble. With a final push, the Vikings broke through, sending their enemies fleeing into the countryside. As the sounds of battle faded, replaced by the groans of the wounded and the victorious shouts of the Norse warriors, Eric found himself standing amidst the carnage, his sword dripping with blood. The reality of what they had done, what he had done, began to sink in. "Gather the spoils," Bjorn ordered, one hand pressed to his wounded shoulder. "We return to the ships before reinforcements arrive." As Eirik helped gather gold, silver, and other valuables from the fallen Saxons, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. This was what he had dreamed of, wasn't it? Glory in battle, riches for his family. Why then did victory taste so bitter? Back on the longship, as they pushed off from the blood-stained beach, Eric approached Bjorn. The leader was having his wound tended to by the ship's healer, his face a mask of pain and frustration. "Speak your mind, boy," Bjorn said, noticing Eric's hesitation. Eric swallowed hard. I thought this would feel different, more glorious. But all I feel is emptiness," Bjorn finished for him. "Aye, it's always thus after your first true battle. The skalds sing of glory and honor, but they rarely mention the stench of death or the weight of lives taken." He fixed Eric with a piercing stare. "Listen well, young one. What we do for our people, for survival, for a future where our children can prosper. Never forget that." Eric nodded, though the knot in his stomach remained. As he turned away, his hand once again found Astrid's tapestry. For a moment he thought he felt a warmth emanating from it, as if his sister's protective wishes were reaching out to him across the sea. Meanwhile, back in Norway, Astrid found herself at the center of a growing storm. Word of her gift had spread despite attempts at secrecy, and now it seemed everyone wanted a piece of her power. "I need a tapestry to ensure my crops will flourish," demanded one farmer. "Weave me good fortune in my trading voyages," insisted a merchant. "Can you see if my son will return from his raiding?" pleaded a worried mother. Astrid felt overwhelmed, torn between her desire to help and the warnings of her grandmother about the dangers of meddling too much with fate. Jarl Halfdan, seeing the pressure Astrid was under, called for a gathering in the great hall. As the villagers assembled, murmuring amongst themselves, Halfdan raised his hands for silence. "My people," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "We have been blessed with a great gift in young Astrid's abilities, but we must use this gift wisely, lest we incur the wrath of the gods." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Astrid, standing to one side with Helga, felt all eyes turned to her. "From this day forth," Halfdan continued, "Astrid's gift will be used only for matters that affect the entire village. No personal requests will be entertained. This is for her protection and ours." Protests immediately erupted. "But what of our needs?" shouted one man. "Why should she not use her power to help us all?" As the hall descended into chaos, a figure slipped in through a side entrance. Tall and lean, with a patch over one eye and a raven perched on his shoulder, the stranger exuded an aura of otherworldly power. "Silence!" the newcomer roared, his voice cutting through the din like a knife. Instantly, a hush fell over the hall. Halfdan's hand went to his sword. "Who are you to interrupt our gathering?" The stranger smiled, a gleam in his one good eye. "I am a wanderer, a seeker of knowledge. Some call me the All-Father. I have come because I sensed a disturbance in the weave of fate. Astrid felt her heart skip a beat. Could it truly be? Had Odin himself come to their village? The god, for who else could he be, fixed his gaze on Astrid. You, child, have been given a rare and dangerous gift, but know this. With great power comes great responsibility. Every thread you weave, every fate you alter, has consequences beyond your imagining. He turned to address the assembled villagers. Beware the temptation to rely too heavily on this power. The strength of the Norse people lies in their own hands and hearts, not in the magic of a single weaver. With that, the stranger turned and strode out of the hall. In the stunned silence that followed, Astrid felt a mix of awe and terror. The weight of her gift, already heavy, now seemed almost unbearable. As the villagers began to disperse, still murmuring about the strange visitor, Helga took Astrid's hand. "Come, child," she said softly. "We have much to discuss. The path ahead is fraught with danger, but you need not walk it alone." Astrid nodded, her mind reeling from all that had transpired. As she followed her grandmother out of the hall, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a journey that would test her in ways she could never have imagined. The threads of fate were shifting, weaving a tapestry of conflict and change. And Astrid, the young weaver with the power to influence destiny, stood at the very heart of the storm. The moon hung low and full over the Norwegian fjord, casting an eerie silver light across the choppy waters. In the depths of the forest that cloaked the surrounding hills, Astrid followed her grandmother Helga along a narrow, winding path. The old seer moved with surprising agility, her staff tapping a steady rhythm against the moss-covered ground. "Where are we going, grandmother?" Astrid asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The forest seemed alive around them, every shadow concealing potential dangers. Helga didn't slow her pace as she replied, "To a place of power, child. A place where the veil between worlds grows thin and the voices of the gods can be heard more clearly." As they crested a small hill, Astrid gasped. Before them stood a circle of ancient standing stones, their weathered surfaces covered in intricate runes that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. At the center of the circle was a gnarled old yew tree, its branches reaching towards the star-filled sky like grasping fingers. Helga led Astrid to the base of the yew tree. "Sit," she commanded, lowering herself to the ground with a soft grunt. Astrid obeyed, feeling the rough bark against her back as she settled beside her grandmother. "Now, child," Helga said, her eyes glinting in the darkness, "tell me of the visions you've been having." Astrid's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you—" "I may be old, but I'm not blind," Helga chuckled. "I've seen the fear in your eyes the way you start at shadows. Your gift is growing stronger, isn't it?" Slowly, Astrid nodded. "I see things when I weave," she admitted. "Flashes of battles yet to come, of storms and fire and death." Her voice broke on the last word, and she felt tears stinging her eyes. Helga reached out, taking Astrid's hands in her own gnarled ones. "What you're experiencing is the burden of the seer, child. The gods have chosen to show you glimpses of possible futures. But remember, the future is not set in stone. It is a tapestry of many threads, constantly shifting and changing." "But how can I bear it?" Astrid asked, her voice small and frightened. "The responsibility is too great. What if I make the wrong choice?" Helga's grip tightened. "That, my dear, is the question every seer must face. But you are not alone. The gods have given you this gift for a reason, and they will guide you if you listen." As if in response to her words, a sudden gust of wind swept through the stone circle, causing the branches of the yew tree to creak and sway. Astrid felt a chill run down her spine as whispers seemed to fill the air, just on the edge of hearing. Helga closed her eyes, her face taking on an expression of intense concentration. "The gods speak," she murmured. "Listen, Astrid. Open your mind to their wisdom." Astrid took a deep breath and closed her eyes, trying to quiet her racing thoughts. At first, she heard nothing but the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a night bird. But then, slowly, Other sounds began to filter through. The clash of steel on steel, the roar of battle, the crackle of flames consuming wood and thatch, the mournful keen of women weeping for the dead, and beneath it all a rhythmic pounding like the beating of a giant heart. Astrid's eyes flew open, her breath coming in short gasps. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Helga's face was grave as she opened her eyes. "War is coming, child. Not just the raids we've known, but a conflict that will shake the very foundations of our world." "But why? Why show me these things if I can't change them?" "Who says you can't?" Helga countered. "Your gift allows you to influence the threads of fate. But be warned, every action has consequences. Change one thread, and the entire tapestry may unravel." As they sat in silence, absorbing the weight of the vision, a twig snapped in the forest beyond the stone circle. Both Astrid and Helga tensed, eyes straining to pierce the darkness. "Who goes there?" Helga called out, her voice strong and commanding despite her age. For a moment, there was no response. Then, a figure stepped into the moonlight. It was Bjorn Ironside, his face haggard and his clothes stained with blood and sea salt. "Bjorn!" Astrid exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "You've returned, but where are the others? Where's Eirik?" Bjorn's expression was grim as he approached. "The raid did not go as planned," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We were ambushed as we tried to push inland. Many good men fell." Astrid felt her heart constrict. "And Eirik?" she asked, dreading the answer. "He lives," Bjorn assured her quickly. "But he was wounded. He's being tended to in the village." Relief flooded through Astrid, followed quickly by a surge of guilt. How many other families would not receive such good news? Helga stood slowly, leaning on her staff. "You've come seeking answers," she said to Bjorn. It wasn't a question. The warrior nodded. "During the battle I found something. An artifact of great power, I think. But I don't understand its purpose." He reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. As he unwrapped it, Astrid gasped. It was a small stone tablet, covered in runes unlike any she had seen before. They seemed to shift and change as she looked at them, making her head spin. Helga's eyes widened as she saw the artifact. "By the gods," she breathed. "Do you know what you've found, Bjorn Ironside?" Bjorn shook his head. "Tell me, seer." "This is a fragment of the Skjebnetavle, the Tablet of Destiny," Helga explained, her voice filled with awe and fear in equal measure. "It is said to contain the secrets of the universe, the past and future of all things." Astrid reached out, drawn to the tablet by a force she couldn't explain. As her fingers brushed its surface, a jolt of energy surged through her. Visions flashed before her eyes, armies clashing on blood-soaked fields, great ships with crosses on their sails, a hooded figure wielding a cross like a weapon against cowering Norse warriors. With a cry, Astrid jerked her hand back. She stumbled, caught by Bjorn's strong arm before she could fall. "What did you see?" Helga demanded, her eyes sharp. Astrid shook her head, trying to clear the jumble of images. I'm not sure, but I think it showed me the end of our way of life." A heavy silence fell over the stone circle. The weight of destiny seemed to press down on them all, as tangible as the cool night air. Finally, Bjorn spoke, his voice low and determined. "Then we must fight to prevent it. Astrid, your gift may be the key to our survival. Will you help us?" Astrid looked from Bjorn to her grandmother, feeling the enormity of the choice before her. To take an active role in shaping the future was to invite untold dangers and responsibilities, but to do nothing was to condemn her people to a fate she had glimpsed in her visions. Drawing a deep breath, Astrid straightened her shoulders and met Bjorn's gaze. "I will," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Whatever it takes, I will fight for our people's future." As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, the three figures stood in the ancient stone circle, bound together by fate and the knowledge of the trials to come. The tablet of destiny pulsed with hidden power, a reminder of the forces they would soon confront. The threads of fate were twisting, weaving a new pattern. And at the heart of it all stood Astrid, the young weaver with the power to change destiny itself. The true test of her abilities, and her courage, was only just beginning. The great hall of Jarl Halfdan buzzed with tension as Bjorn Ironside recounted the details of their ill-fated raid. Warriors nursed their wounds, both physical and to their pride, while families of the fallen mourned silently in corners. Astrid sat near the front, her eyes fixed on her brother Eric, who lay on a pallet, his leg bound tightly with blood-stained bandages. "The Saxons were prepared for us," Bjorn growled, his fist clenching around the hilt of his axe. "They had new weapons, new tactics. It was as if they knew we were coming." Jarl Halfdan stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Could there be a traitor among us?" A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. Accusations and suspicions began to fly, voices rising in anger. "Enough!" Halfdan roared, silencing the hall. "This bickering solves nothing. We must look to the future, not dwell on our losses." He turned to Astrid, his eyes sharp. "Young seer, what do your visions tell you? What path should we take?" Astrid felt the weight of every gaze in the hall upon her. She swallowed hard, her fingers instinctively reaching for the threads of her belt, as if seeking comfort in the familiar act of weaving. I've seen great changes coming," she began hesitantly. "Not just for us, but for all the Norse people. There are new powers rising in the south, bringing strange gods and new ways of thinking." "Bah," spat an old warrior near the back. "Let them come. Our gods are strong. Our arms are mighty. We'll send these southerners back to their soft lands." Cheers of agreement rose, but Astrid shook her head. "It's not that simple," she insisted. "The changes I've seen, they're like a great wave, unstoppable. We can ride it, or be crushed beneath it, but we cannot stop it entirely." Silence fell over the hall as her words sank in. Bjorn stepped forward, the tablet of destiny clutched in his hand. "Tell them what you saw when you touched this, Astrid," he urged. Taking a deep breath, Astrid recounted her vision of armies clashing, of great ships with crosses, and of Norse warriors cowering before a new faith. As she spoke, she could feel the mood in the hall shifting from defiance to unease. "What would you have us do?" Jarl Halfdan asked, his voice grave. "Abandon our ways? Bow to these southern gods?" "No," Astrid said firmly, "but we must adapt. We must learn, grow stronger in new ways. The old ways of raiding and plunder, they won't be enough in the world that's coming." A commotion near the door interrupted the discussion. A group of villagers pushed their way into the already crowded hall, led by a tall, broad-shouldered man named Gunnar. "Jarl Halfdan," Gunnar called out, "we've come to a decision. My family and I, along with several others, we're leaving for Iceland." Shocked whispers rippled through the crowd. Halfdan's eyes narrowed. "Leaving? In the midst of our troubles?" Gunnar stood his ground. "We've heard tales of a new land, free from the conflicts that plague us here. A place where we can start anew, hold to our traditions without interference from these southern powers." "Coward!" someone shouted from the crowd. "You'd abandon your people in their time of need?" "Enough!" Halfdan thundered once more. He fixed Gunnar with a stern gaze. "This is your choice to make, but know that once you leave, there may be no coming back. Are you certain this is what you want?" Gunnar nodded solemnly. "We are, Jarl. We sail with the next tide." As the hall erupted into arguments once more, Astrid felt a tugging on her sleeve. It was Eirik, struggling to sit up despite his wound. "Astrid," he whispered, his face pale with pain. "Your tapestry, the one you gave me for protection, it saved my life in the battle. But now it's unraveling." Astrid's eyes widened as Eirik pulled out the small tapestry from beneath his tunic. True to his words, the edges were fraying, the once vibrant colors fading before her eyes. With trembling hands, Astrid took the tapestry. As her fingers touched the threads, a vision slammed into her with the force of a warhammer. She saw Gunnar and his people, their ships tossed by monstrous waves. Strange serpentine shapes moved beneath the water's surface. On a distant shore, figures with glowing eyes watched the approaching vessels, their intentions unclear. The vision shifted. Bjorn stood atop a hill, the tablet of destiny held high. Lightning crackled around him as he faced off against a shadowy figure wielding a cross like a weapon. Finally, she saw herself, older and wearied, standing before a great loom. The tapestry she wove seemed to encompass the entire world, its threads glowing with an otherworldly light. Astrid gasped as the vision released her, nearly falling to her knees. Eric caught her arm, his face creased with concern. "What did you see?" he asked urgently. Before Astrid could answer, a cold wind swept through the hall, extinguishing torches and sending a chill down every spine. In the sudden darkness, a figure materialized near the central hearth, tall, lean, with a patch over one eye and a raven perched on each shoulder. "Odin All-Father," Jarl Halfdan breathed, dropping to one knee. Others followed suit, but Astrid found herself frozen in place, unable to look away from the god's piercing gaze. "You stand at a crossroads, people of the North." Odin's voice resonated through the hall, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The threads of fate are tangled, the future obscured even from my sight." His eye fixed on Astrid. "You, young weaver, have been given a great and terrible gift, the power to influence destiny itself. But beware, every thread you pull, every fate you alter, comes at a price." "What would you have us do, All-Father?" Halfdan asked, his voice trembling slightly. Odin's lips curved in an enigmatic smile. "That is not for me to decide. The choice is yours, all of yours. Will you cling to the old ways and risk being swept away? Or will you adapt, weaving a new destiny for your people?" His gaze swept the hall, lingering on Gunnar and his would-be settlers, on Bjorn with the tablet of destiny, and finally on Astrid once more. "The storm is coming," Odin intoned. "How you weather it will determine the fate of all the Norse people. Choose wisely." With that, the god vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. The torches flared back to life, revealing a hall full of stunned and shaken Vikings. In the silence that followed, Astrid looked down at the unraveling tapestry in her hands. She understood now. The old patterns were breaking down, the familiar threads of their lives coming undone. But within that unraveling lay the opportunity to weave something new, something that might carry them through the tumultuous times ahead. "Jarl Halfdan," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I think I know what we need to do." As all eyes turned to her once more, Astrid squared her shoulders. The weight of destiny pressed down upon her, but she no longer felt crushed by it. Instead, she felt a fierce determination growing within her. The winds of change were blowing, and it was time for the people of the North to set their sails and chart a new course into the unknown future. The longship's dragon-headed prow cut through the choppy waters of the North Sea, spray flying as it crested each wave. At the helm stood Bjorn Ironside, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the faint outline of Ireland's coast was just becoming visible. Behind him, 24 warriors readied their weapons, the excitement of impending battle palpable in the air. Among them was Eirik, Astrid's brother, his leg now healed but bearing a jagged scar from their last ill-fated raid. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, trying to quell the nervous energy coursing through him. "Land ho!" came the cry from the lookout. Bjorn turned to address his men, his voice carrying over the wind and waves. "Warriors of the North, before us lies the Emerald Isle, ripe for the taking. But remember, this is no ordinary raid. We seek not just plunder, but knowledge. The Irish monks are said to possess secrets that could change the course of our future." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crew. This talk of knowledge and secrets was far from their usual pre-raid speech. Eirik stepped forward, his voice hesitant. Bjorn, I must ask, why this change in strategy? What aren't you telling us? Bjorn's eyes narrowed, studying the young warrior for a moment before responding. Your sister's visions have shown us a changing world, Eric. If we are to survive, we must adapt. The riches we seek today are not just gold and silver, but the wisdom to face the storms that are coming. As if in response to his words, a roll of thunder echoed across the sky. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, mirroring the unease spreading through the crew. Enough talk, growled Håkon, a grizzled veteran of countless raids. Let's spill some Irish blood and take what's ours. A cheer went up from some of the men, but Eric noticed others exchanging uncertain glances. The world they knew was changing, and not everyone was ready to change with it. As the longship approached the shore, Bjorn barked out orders. First wave, with me. Eric, take a small group and find the monastery. Remember, we need the monks alive. The Vikings leapt into the shallow water, weapons raised as they charged towards the beach. But instead of the disorganized resistance they expected, they found a line of Irish warriors waiting for them, shields locked and spears bristling. By Thor's hammer, Eric muttered. They were expecting us. The clash of steel on steel filled the air as the two forces met. Eric found himself locked in combat with a burly Irishman, their swords ringing out with each blow. Around him, his fellow Vikings fought with their usual ferocity, but the Irish held their ground with unexpected discipline. As Eric finally felled his opponent, he heard Bjorn's voice rising above the din of battle. To the monastery. Now, while they're engaged. Gathering a small group of warriors, Eric broke away from the main fight, racing towards the stone buildings visible on a nearby hill. As they approached, they saw figures in robes hurrying inside, clutching armfuls of books and scrolls. Stop! Eric called out in broken Irish, a language he'd picked up from previous raids. We mean you no harm. We seek knowledge, not blood. The monks hesitated, clearly torn between fear and curiosity at this unexpected declaration. An older man with a long white beard stepped forward, his eyes sharp as he studied the Vikings. Knowledge, you say? The old monk asked in Norse, surprising Eirik. And what would Norse raiders want with the wisdom of Christ? Eirik lowered his sword, gesturing for his men to do the same. The world is changing, holy man. We seek the means to change with it. A cry from the beach drew their attention. The Irish warriors had rallied, pushing the Vikings back towards their ships. Bjorn was visible in the thick of the fighting, his axe rising and falling as he carved a path through the enemy ranks. The old monk's eyes narrowed as he watched the battle. Your people bring nothing but death and destruction to our shores. Why should we help you? Eric felt the weight of destiny pressing down on him. He knew that his next words could determine the fate of not just this raid, but of his entire people. Because, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, the storm that's coming will engulf us all, Norse and Irish alike. Together, we might weather it. Divided, we will surely drown. The monk studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Come inside quickly. There isn't much time. As Eirik and his small group followed the monks into the monastery, the storm that had been threatening finally broke. Rain lashed down in sheets, turning the battlefield into a muddy quagmire. Inside, Eric's eyes widened at the sight of countless books and scrolls lining the walls. The old monk moved quickly, selecting specific volumes and rolling up parchments. These contain the knowledge you seek, he said, thrusting the materials into Eric's arms. Stories of distant lands, maps of unknown seas, and writings on the new faith that's spreading across the world. Use them wisely. A thunderous crash from outside made them all jump. Eric rushed to a window to see the Irish forces had broken through the Viking lines. Bjorn was rallying the survivors for a fighting retreat to the ships. We have to go, Eric said urgently. Thank you, holy man, we won't forget this. As they turned to leave, the old monk caught Eric's arm. Remember, young warrior, true strength lies not in the sword, but in the mind and heart. The future belongs to those who can adapt, who can learn from their enemies as well as their friends. Eirik nodded solemnly, clutching the precious books and scrolls to his chest as he and his men raced back down the hill towards the beach. The retreat was chaotic, with Vikings fighting rearguard actions as they struggled through the mud towards their ships. Eirik saw Bjorn, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, bodily throwing men into the nearest longship. "Eirik!" Bjorn roared when he saw him. "Did you get what we came for?" In answer, Eirik held up the books and scrolls. A fierce grin split Bjorn's face despite the dire situation. As the last of the survivors clambered aboard, they shoved off from the shore, oars straining against the storm-tossed waves. The Irish warriors crowded the beach, shouting victory cries and hurling the occasional spear that fell short in the wind. Eirik found himself at the stern of the ship, watching the Irish coast recede into the gloom. The raid had been a failure by any normal measure. They were returning with no gold, no slaves, and fewer men than they'd arrived with. And yet, the books in his arms felt heavier than any treasure he'd ever carried. As lightning split the sky and thunder rolled across the waves, Eirik thought of his sister Astrid, of her visions and her warnings. He thought of the old monk's words about adaptation and learning from enemies. The storm raged around them, both literal and metaphorical. But for the first time since this journey began, Eirik felt a glimmer of hope. They were battered, bloodied, but not beaten, and they were returning home with something far more valuable than gold. They were bringing back the seeds of change, the knowledge that might just help their people navigate the turbulent waters of the future. As the longship rose and fell with each massive wave, Eirik clutched the books tighter and set his gaze northward, towards home and the uncertain destiny that awaited them all. The great hall of Jarl Halfdan buzzed with tension as Bjorn Ironside and his battered crew recounted the events of their Irish raid. Astrid sat near the front, her eyes fixed on her brother Eirik, who clutched a bundle of books and scrolls as if they were more precious than gold. "A failure," spat Håkon, the grizzled veteran. "We return with empty hands and fewer men. What good are these monks' scribbles?" Bjorn slammed his fist on the table, silencing the murmurs. "You short-sighted fool. These scribbles may hold the key to our survival. The world is changing and we must change with it or perish." Jarl Halfdan raised his hand for quiet. "Bjorn speaks wisely. But before we delve into these new treasures, we face a more immediate threat." He turned to a scout who had just entered the hall. "Speak, Torstein. What news from the east?" Torstein's face was grim as he addressed the assembly. "The rival clans have united under Jarl Eirik Bloodaxe. They march on us as we speak with a force twice the size of ours." A shocked silence fell over the hall, broken only by the crackling of the central hearth. Astrid felt a chill run down her spine, remembering her visions of battle and bloodshed. Halfdan's eyes narrowed. "How long do we have?" 3 days, at most," Torstein replied. The hall erupted into chaos, warriors arguing strategy while others called for immediate evacuation. Amidst the din, Astrid noticed Eirik slip away, still clutching his precious books. She found him outside, staring out over the fjord where longships bobbed at anchor. "Eirik," she called softly. "What troubles you, brother?" Eirik turned, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Astrid, I'm not sure I can do this anymore. The raid, the killing, it's not what I thought it would be." Astrid placed a hand on his arm. "Tell me what happened in Ireland." As Eirik recounted his encounter with the old monk and the words of wisdom he'd received, Astrid felt a surge of hope. "Don't you see, Eirik? This is exactly what my visions have been pointing towards. We need to find a new way, a path between the old and the new." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of running feet. Bjorn appeared, his face flushed with urgency. "Astrid, Eirik, come quickly. Jarl Halfdan calls for you both." Back in the great hall, they found Halfdan bent over a crude map, with Bjorn and other war leaders gathered around. The Jarl looked up as they entered, his eyes locking onto Astrid. "Young seer," he said, his voice grave. We need your gift now more than ever. What do your visions show of the coming battle? Astrid hesitated, feeling the weight of every gaze upon her. I'm not sure. The threads of fate are tangled, the future unclear. Halfdan's face darkened. We don't have time for uncertainty. Eric Bloodaxe and his army will be upon us in days. We need a strategy now. Eric stepped forward, surprising everyone. Perhaps we're approaching this the wrong way. The old monk in Ireland spoke of adaptation, of learning from our enemies. And what would you have us do? Hakon sneered. Throw down our axes and pick up quills? No, Eric said, his voice growing stronger. But maybe we can use their expectations against them. They'll be expecting a standard shield wall, a head-on clash. What if we did something completely different? Bjorn's eyes lit up with interest. Go on, boy. What do you propose? As Eirik outlined his plan, inspired by tactics he'd glimpsed in the Irish books, Astrid felt a strange sensation. The tangled threads of fate in her mind's eye began to shift and realign. It could work, she breathed, drawing everyone's attention. I can see it. A path to victory, but it's narrow and treacherous. Halfdan studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. Very well. Bjorn, you'll lead our main force here, at the mouth of the valley. Eric, take a smaller group and enact your plan. Astrid, I want you with Eirik. Your gift may be needed to navigate this narrow path you've seen. As the war council broke up and preparations began in earnest, Astrid pulled Eric aside. Brother, there's something you should know. My latest vision, it showed great danger for you specifically. Promise me you'll be careful. Eric squeezed her hand reassuringly. I promise, sister. But some risks must be taken for the good of our people. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Warriors sharpened weapons and repaired armor, while others constructed the special equipment Eric had designed based on the Irish books. Astrid spent her time weaving, pouring her power into protective tapestries for the key warriors. On the morning of the 3rd day, scouts reported the approach of Eric Bloodaxe's army. As the village prepared for battle, Astrid found herself standing with Eirik and his small band atop a cliff overlooking the valley where the battle would be fought. Are you sure about this? She asked, eyeing the strange contraptions they'd built. A series of wooden platforms on rollers, disguised with branches and leaves. Eric nodded, though she could see the nervousness in his eyes. It has to work. If it doesn't... He didn't need to finish the thought. If their plan failed, their people would be massacred. The sound of war horns echoed across the valley as Eric Bloodaxe's army came into view. It was an impressive sight. Hundreds of warriors in gleaming mail, their shields forming a bristling wall as they advanced. Bjorn's smaller force met them at the mouth of the valley, forming their own shield wall. The clash when the two forces met was thunderous, the sound of steel on steel echoing off the cliff walls. Now, Eric shouted, release the platforms. Astrid watched in awe as the disguised platforms rolled down the cliff face, picking up speed. As they crashed into the rear of Eric's forces, the branches fell away, revealing dozens of Viking warriors who leapt into the fray, sowing chaos and confusion. Taking advantage of the disorder, Bjorn's forces pushed forward, driving a wedge into the enemy lines. Astrid could see Eric Bloodaxe himself, a giant of a man with a blood-red axe, bellowing orders as he tried to regain control of the battle. It's working, Eirik exulted. Come on, we need to join the fight. As they scrambled down the cliff path, Astrid felt a sudden chill. The threads of fate shifted in her mind, and she saw a terrible vision, Eirik, facing off against Eric Bloodaxe, the rival Jarl's axe cleaving through her brother's shield. Eric, wait, she cried, but her voice was lost in the din of battle. Astrid raced after her brother, her heart pounding. The fate of their people hung in the balance, and she knew that the next few moments would determine not just the outcome of this battle, but the future of the Norse way of life. As she plunged into the chaos of the fighting, Astrid silently prayed to the gods, hoping that her gift would be enough to change the threads of fate once more and save both her brother and her people from the gathering storm. The clash of steel on steel filled the air as Astrid pushed her way through the chaos of battle. Warriors from both sides locked in mortal combat surrounded her, but her eyes searched desperately for one figure, her brother, Eirik. "Eric!" she screamed, her voice barely audible above the din of war. "Eric, where are you?" A hand grabbed her arm, yanking her aside just as an axe whistled through the space where she had been standing. It was Bjorn Ironside, his face streaked with blood and grime. "Are you mad, girl?" he roared. "This is no place for a weaver." Astrid wrenched her arm free. "I saw a vision. Eirik is in danger. He's going to face Erik Bloodaxe." Bjorn's eyes widened, then narrowed with determination. "Come on," he growled, hefting his shield. "We'll find him together." They fought their way through the melee, Bjorn's axe clearing a path while Astrid stayed close behind, her heart pounding. The tide of battle seemed to be turning in their favor, but the cost was high. The ground was slick with blood, bodies of fallen warriors from both sides littering the field. Suddenly, Astrid spotted him. Erik stood atop a small rise, his sword flashing as he fended off two of Erik Bloodaxe's warriors, and striding towards him, his massive frame unmistakable even from a distance, was Erik himself. "There!" Astrid cried, pointing. Bjorn saw it too. "Odin's beard," he muttered. "The boy's going to get himself killed." They redoubled their efforts, fighting desperately to reach Eirik before it was too late. Astrid could see her brother's face now, set in grim determination as he faced the approaching Jarl. Erik Bloodaxe lived up to his name. His great axe, stained crimson, swept in a deadly arc, scattering his own men in his eagerness to reach Eirik. "So, this is the strategist who thought to outwit me," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "I'll cleave you in two, boy." Erik raised his shield, bracing for the impact. Astrid saw it all as if in slow motion, the axe descending, her vision of Erik's shield shattering about to come true. "No!" she screamed, and in that moment of desperation, something extraordinary happened. The threads of fate, usually invisible to all but her mind's eye, suddenly materialized in the air around her. Glowing strands of destiny crisscrossed the battlefield, and Astrid instinctively reached out, grasping one that led directly to Erik. With all her might she pulled. Reality seemed to warp. Erik, as if yanked by an invisible hand, stumbled backwards. Erik's axe missed him by a hair's breadth, throwing the massive Jarl off balance. In that moment of confusion, Bjorn struck. His own axe caught Erik in the side, sending the rival Jarl sprawling. The battlefield fell silent, all eyes turning to the fallen leader. Erik Bloodaxe struggled to his feet, blood pouring from his wound. His eyes, filled with a mixture of rage and disbelief, locked onto Astrid. "Witch!" he snarled. "What sorcery is this?" Before anyone could react, a blinding flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Standing atop the rise where Erik had been moments before was a figure that made every warrior, Norse and rival alike, fall to their knees. Odin Allfather, in all his terrible glory, surveyed the battlefield. His single eye gleamed with otherworldly knowledge, and ravens circled above him, cawing ominously. "Enough!" The god's voice resonated across the field, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The threads of fate have been altered. The future is changing." His gaze fell upon Astrid, who found herself unable to look away. "You, young weaver, have meddled with forces beyond your understanding. The consequences of your actions will ripple through time." Astrid felt a chill run down her spine. I only wanted to save my brother," she stammered. Odin's expression softened slightly. "The bonds of family are strong, but the tapestry of fate is delicate. Every thread pulled affects the whole." He turned to Erik Bloodaxe, who was still on his knees, clutching his wounded side. "You sought to destroy your own kin for power. This path leads only to ruin." Erik's face contorted with a mixture of pain and defiance. "The old ways are dying, Allfather. We must fight to survive." The old ways are changing, Odin corrected, but not dying. It is adapt or perish, Eric Bloodaxe. The choice is yours. With that, the god vanished as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving behind a stunned silence. In the aftermath of Odin's appearance, the fighting ceased. Warriors from both sides looked at each other in confusion, unsure whether to resume battle or lay down their arms. Eirik, shaken but alive, made his way to Astrid's side. "Sister," he said, his voice filled with awe, "what did you do?" Before Astrid could answer, Bjorn approached, supporting a limping Eric Bloodaxe. The rival Jarl's face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear as he regarded Astrid and Eirik. "It seems," Eric said grudgingly, "that the gods favor you today. Perhaps there is wisdom in your new ways after all." Jarl Halfdan, who had been fighting elsewhere on the battlefield, joined them. He looked from Eric to Astrid, then to Eirik. "It appears we have much to discuss," he said gravely. As the warriors began to tend to their wounded and gather their dead, Astrid felt a strange sensation. The tablet of destiny, which Bjorn had been carrying, began to glow faintly. Without thinking, she reached out and touched it. Instantly, her mind was flooded with visions. She saw great longships sailing across vast oceans, discovering new lands. She saw Norse warriors kneeling before crosses, accepting a new faith while still honoring the old gods in secret. She saw her people's skills in shipbuilding and navigation spreading across Europe, influencing the course of history. And through it all, she saw threads, countless threads of fate, interweaving in patterns more complex than any tapestry she had ever woven. Gasping, Astrid pulled her hand away from the tablet. Eric steadied her as she swayed on her feet. "What did you see?" he asked urgently. Astrid looked at her brother, then at Bjorn, Halfdan, and even the wounded Eric. She saw the uncertainty in their eyes, the fear of a changing world they didn't fully understand. "I saw our future," she said slowly. "It's not the end of our people, but a new beginning. We have a choice to make, all of us. We can cling to the old ways and fade into history, or we can adapt, taking the best of who we are into a new age." Bjorn nodded solemnly. "The Irish monk's knowledge, Eirik's new strategies, your gift of foresight. Perhaps these are the tools Odin has given us to forge this new path." Jarl Halfdan stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It won't be easy. Many will resist change. Then we must lead by example," Eirik said, his voice strong despite his exhaustion. "Show our people that we can be Vikings, proud and strong, while still embracing new ideas." As the sun began to set over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the blood-soaked ground, Astrid felt a glimmer of hope. The future she had seen was uncertain, filled with challenges and changes, but it was a future where their people survived, adapted, and left their mark on the world. The prophecy had been unveiled, and with it, a new chapter in the saga of the Norse people was about to begin. Astrid knew that her gift, her curse, of weaving fate would be crucial in navigating the turbulent waters ahead. As she looked at the faces of those around her, she silently vowed to use her power wisely to help guide her people through the storms of change that were surely coming. The threads of fate were in her hands, and she would weave a tapestry worthy of the Skald's greatest sagas. The great hall of Jarl Halfdan buzzed with an energy unlike anything Astrid had ever experienced. Representatives from rival clans, once bitter enemies, now sat side by side with her own people. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, mead, and the underlying tension of old grudges not quite forgotten. At the head of the table sat Jarl Halfdan, his face a mask of careful diplomacy. To his right was Eric Bloodaxe, his wound from the battle healing but still visible, a constant reminder of how close they had come to destroying each other. Astrid sat to Halfdan's left, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down upon her. "Friends, rivals, fellow Norsemen," Halfdan began, his voice carrying across the hall. We stand at a crossroads. The world is changing around us, and we must decide how to face that change. Eric Bloodaxe leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the firelight. And why should we change at all? Our ways have served us well for generations. Before Halfdan could respond, Astrid felt a familiar tug at the edges of her consciousness. The threads of fate shimmered into view, crisscrossing the hall in a complex web. Without thinking, she stood, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Because if we don't, we will fade into obscurity," she said, her eyes unfocused as she traced the paths of destiny. "I see a future where our people are remembered only as savage raiders, our culture and wisdom forgotten." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Astrid continued, the visions flowing through her like a river. "But I also see another path, one where we adapt, where we take our strength, our courage, and our knowledge, and use them to shape the world around us." Eric stood up beside her, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "My sister speaks the truth. In Ireland, I saw the power of knowledge. The monks there have wisdom that could help us navigate these changing times." "Bah!" spat an old warrior near the back. "What do we need with monks' scribbles? Our strength is in our axes and our ships." Bjorn Ironside rose, his imposing presence silencing the dissent. "Aye, our strength is in our axes and ships. But think, you old fool, who built those ships? Who forged those axes? It was not just brawn, but the wisdom passed down through generations. If we can add new knowledge to that wisdom, imagine how much stronger we could become." The hall fell silent as the warriors contemplated Bjorn's words. Astrid felt the threads of fate shifting, new possibilities opening up before them. Suddenly the doors of the hall burst open. A group of bedraggled warriors staggered in, their clothes torn and bloodied. At their head was Gunnar, the leader of the group that had set out for Iceland weeks ago. "Jarl Halfdan," Gunnar called out, his voice hoarse. We have returned, but at great cost." As Gunnar recounted their harrowing journey, the storms that had nearly sunk their ships, the strange creatures they had glimpsed beneath the waves, and the harsh, unforgiving land they had found, Astrid felt the threads of fate pulling taut. "And that's not all," Gunnar said, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "We found something there, on that volcanic isle. An ancient shrine, unlike anything I've ever seen." He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, intricately carved stone tablet. As soon as Astrid laid eyes on it, she gasped. The threads of fate around the object were so densely woven, they almost obscured it from view. "The shrine was dedicated to the Norns," Gunnar continued, "the keepers of fate itself. This tablet, it speaks of a prophecy, a great change coming to our people." Eric Bloodaxe scoffed. "More talk of change. Are we to abandon everything we are based on some carvings in a frozen wasteland?" But Astrid wasn't listening. She had stepped forward, her hand outstretched towards the tablet. As her fingers brushed its surface, the world around her fell away. She found herself standing in a vast, misty realm. Before her stood 3 women, one young and fair, one matronly and stern, and one ancient and wizened, the Norns themselves, the weavers of fate. Astrid of the North, the youngest spoke, her voice like a spring breeze. "You who have dared to alter the threads of destiny. Your actions have sent ripples through the tapestry of time," the middle Norn continued, her tone accusatory. "But perhaps," the eldest finished, her ancient eyes gleaming with wisdom, "this is as it was always meant to be." Astrid fell to her knees before them. "I only sought to protect my people," she said, her voice trembling. "And so you shall," the 3 spoke in unison. "But beware, young weaver. The path ahead is fraught with danger. The old and the new must be woven together with great care, lest the entire tapestry unravel." They gestured, and Astrid saw a great loom before them. On it was woven the most intricate tapestry she had ever seen, depicting the past, present, and myriad possible futures of her people. "Your gift allows you to see the threads," the youngest Norn said. "Now you must learn to weave them." But choose wisely, warned the middle Norn. Every thread you pull, every pattern you change will have consequences beyond your imagining. The fate of your people rests in your hands, the eldest concluded. Weave well, Astrid of the North. With a gasp, Astrid found herself back in the great hall, her hand still touching the tablet. Only a moment had passed, but she felt as though she had aged years. Astrid? Eric's concerned voice broke through her daze. What did you see? She looked around the hall at the faces of warriors and rivals, all waiting with bated breath. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. I've seen our future, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. And I know now that it's not set in stone. We have the power to shape it, to weave our own destiny. She turned to Jarl Halfdan and Eric Bloodaxe. But we cannot do it alone. Our strength has always been in our unity, in the bonds of kinship and honor. Now more than ever we must stand together. Eric Bloodaxe's face was unreadable for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Perhaps there is wisdom in your words, young seer. But how do we proceed? Astrid took a deep breath, feeling the weight of destiny on her shoulders. We learn, we adapt. We take the best of our old ways and combine them with new knowledge. Eric's Irish books, Gunnar's discoveries in Iceland, the wisdom of the Norns. All of these are threads we can weave into the tapestry of our future. As she spoke, she could almost see the threads of fate shifting, new patterns forming. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers, but for the first time, Astrid felt truly hopeful. It won't be easy, she concluded, looking around at the assembled warriors. But we are Norse. We do not shrink from challenges. We face them head-on, with courage and cunning. Together, we will forge a new destiny for our people. A cheer went up from the gathered Norsemen, rivals and kinsmen alike. As Astrid sat back down, she felt Eirik squeeze her hand supportively. You've given them hope, sister, he whispered. Now comes the hard part, making it a reality. Astrid nodded, her mind already racing with plans and possibilities. The threads of fate were intertwined, the old and the new woven together into a tapestry yet unfinished. And she, Astrid of the North, would be the weaver to guide her people into this uncertain but promising future. The air crackled with an otherworldly energy as Astrid stood before her largest loom yet. Her fingers danced across the threads, weaving patterns more complex than any she had ever attempted. Each strand pulsed with the power of fate itself, and she could feel the weight of her people's destiny in every movement. Outside the small hut, the sounds of battle raged. Bjorn Ironside's war cry echoed across the fjord as he led a united Viking force against an enemy none of them had ever faced before. The manifestations of chaos unleashed by Loki's mischief. Eirik burst through the door, his sword dripping with an ichor that seemed to writhe with a life of its own. Astrid, he gasped. We can't hold them back much longer. Whatever you're doing, it needs to happen now. Astrid didn't take her eyes off her work. I need more time, Eirik. The tapestry isn't complete. Her brother's face was grim as he peered out the window. Time is something we don't have, sister. Look. Astrid allowed herself a quick glance outside and felt her heart skip a beat. Monstrous creatures out of the darkest Norse legends were advancing on the village. Jotuns towered over the buildings, their frost-rimed clubs smashing through defenses. Fire giants hurled boulders of molten rock, setting homes ablaze. And there, in the midst of it all, stood Loki himself, his form shifting and changing as he directed the chaos with maniacal glee. Hold them off, Eirik, Astrid said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm almost there. I can feel it. Eirik nodded, squaring his shoulders. I'll do what I can. But hurry, Astrid. The fate of our people hangs in the balance. As her brother rushed back into the fray, Astrid redoubled her efforts. Her hands moved with supernatural speed, guided by the visions flowing through her mind. She saw glimpses of possible futures with each thread she wove. A future where the Vikings were wiped out, forgotten by history. Another where they conquered the world, but lost their souls in the process. And finally, a delicate path between the two, where adaptation and strength intertwined. Sweat beaded on her brow as she worked, the tapestry growing larger and more intricate by the second. Outside, she could hear Jarl Halfdan rallying the clans, his voice carrying over the din of battle. Stand fast, warriors of the north. We face not just the end of our way of life, but the twilight of the gods themselves. Show these creatures of chaos the true meaning of Norse courage. A thunderous cheer went up from the Viking forces, momentarily drowning out the sounds of combat. Astrid felt a surge of pride and determination. Her people were fighting with everything they had. She could do no less. Suddenly, a familiar and unwelcome voice spoke from the shadows of the hut. My, what an interesting weave you're creating, little seer. Astrid's head snapped up to see Loki lounging against the wall, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. You, she gasped. Indeed, the trickster god said, sauntering closer to examine her work. I must say, I'm impressed. You've managed to tangle the threads of fate quite thoroughly, almost as well as I could have done myself. Astrid's eyes narrowed. This is your doing, isn't it? The monsters, the chaos. You're trying to bring about Ragnarok early. Loki's smile widened. Guilty as charged. But can you blame me? The old ways are dying, little seer. I'm simply hastening the process. Our ways are not dying, Astrid shot back, her hands never stopping their intricate dance across the loom. They're changing, adapting. There's a difference. Is there? Loki mused. Change, destruction. It's all the same in the end. The old must make way for the new. I'm simply ensuring it happens on my terms. As he spoke, Loki reached out towards the tapestry. Astrid felt a surge of panic, knowing that a single touch from the chaos god could unravel all her work. Don't, she cried out. But before Loki could make contact, a blinding flash of lightning filled the hut. When Astrid's vision cleared, she saw Odin himself standing between her and Loki, his spear Gungnir leveled at the trickster's chest. Enough, Loki! Odin's voice boomed, filled with the power of storms. You go too far. Loki's smile never faltered, though Astrid thought she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Ah, All-Father, come to save your precious humans? How predictable. Not to save them, Odin corrected, to bear witness. The fate of both gods and mortals hangs in the balance, and it is not for us to decide the outcome. The one-eyed god turned to Astrid, his gaze seeming to pierce through to her very soul. The choice is yours, young weaver. The tapestry of fate lies before you, unfinished. What pattern will you weave for the future of your people? Astrid felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon her. She looked at her tapestry, seeing the myriad possibilities contained within its threads. Then she glanced out the window where her brother Bjorn, Halfdan, and countless other brave warriors fought against impossible odds. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. With renewed determination, Astrid's hands flew across the loom. She wove with a skill and speed that seemed to surprise even the gods watching her. Threads of gold for courage, silver for wisdom, red for the blood of their ancestors, and blue for the seas they would sail. As she worked, she spoke, her voice growing stronger with each word. I weave a future where the strength of the old ways meets the wisdom of the new, where our people adapt and grow, but never forget who they are and where they came from. The tapestry began to glow, its light spilling out of the hut and across the battlefield. Vikings and monsters alike paused in their combat, transfixed by the sight. I weave a future of exploration and discovery, where our ships sail to distant shores and our knowledge spreads across the world. The monstrous creatures besieging the village began to fade, like mist under the morning sun. Loki's face contorted in a mixture of rage and disbelief. I weave a future where the stories of our gods and heroes are never forgotten, but live on in the hearts and minds of generations to come. Odin nodded approvingly, a small smile playing on his lips. The light from the tapestry grew brighter, enveloping everything in its warm glow. "And finally," Astrid said, placing the last thread with trembling fingers, "I weave a future where we face the changes ahead not with fear but with courage and hope. For we are the people of the North, and our saga is far from over." As the last word left her lips, there was a flash of light so bright it seemed to illuminate the entire world. When it faded, Astrid found herself standing on a cliff overlooking the fjord. The village below was untouched by battle, its people going about their daily lives. Eric appeared beside her, his eyes wide with wonder. "Astrid, what happened? The monsters, the gods, they're gone," she said softly. "Or perhaps they were never here. The lines between reality and legend have always been blurred for our people." "And the future?" Eric asked. "What becomes of us?" Astrid smiled, feeling the threads of fate humming around her, full of possibility. "That, my brother, is up to us. We've been given a chance to write our own saga. Let's make it one worthy of the Skald's greatest tales." As they made their way back to the village, Astrid could almost see the threads of destiny stretching out before them, weaving a tapestry more grand and beautiful than any she could have imagined. The fate of legends was in their hands now, and the greatest adventure was just beginning.